I'm good, right, John, with the screen?
We're live.
Hi, good morning, and welcome to the Maryland State Data Center annual meeting and workshop hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning. My name is Alfred Sundara. I'm the manager of projections and state data center at the Maryland Department of Planning. Today, we are conducting our annual meeting virtually. Hopefully next year, we will be able to do an in-person conference. We have about 80 people registered for this event today. Our focus of this conference is the 2020 census and its data products. We have several folks from the Census Bureau presenting on various topics. I would like to thank them for taking the time to present to us. Before we get started with the conference, I have a poll question. So you would see a poll question pop up on your screen. If you're unable to click on the options, you might have to minimize your or exit from full screen to answer the question. We'll give a few seconds for people to answer. Once we have enough responses, we will show the results on the screen.
How are you going to comment on these?
Right, I'm trying to figure out where exactly they are. The screen is a little small. Okay, we have the results, and I can't really see the numbers, but like hopefully, John, can you please read them for me?
Yes, 57% responded they're from state government, 14% from county government, 11% are with metropolitan planning organizations, and 9% are with public library, as well as 9% with other.
Thank you, John. So I would like to announce that we are recording this webinar, and we will post it next week on our State Data Center webpage under annual meetings. We will post today's PowerPoint presentations as PDFs on the website, along with the recordings of today's presentation. I will also note that we have posted the agenda as a handout on the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. And here is a screenshot of the State Data Center website homepage, and you will be able to access the presentation by clicking on Meetings and Workshops link highlighted in the green box. So before we begin, we want to orient you to some of the GoToWebinar features that you will be using today. The white arrow in the orange background shows or hides the control panel for the GoToWebinar. If you have a question or for any of the speakers, you do not have to wait till the end. You can submit your question anytime by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. We will have a Q&A session following each presentation. And if there are any questions that have not been answered due to time constraints, we will get back to the questions through email. Today's webinar features 4 presentations. So we have Jason Devine, Assistant Division Chief, Census Program Areas in the Population Division of the Census Bureau. He will give an update on the 2020 Census Demographic and Housing Characteristics file. We have Michael Burrows. He's a statistician in the Social, Economic, and Housing Statistics Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. He will present findings on working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have Ryan Burson. He's a statistician with the Coordination and Dissemination and Outreach branch of the Census Bureau. he will provide an update on the population and housing unit estimates. And we have Michael Ratcliffe from the Geography Division of the Census Bureau providing some insight on urban and rural area designations. From the Department of Planning, we have Secretary McCord saying a few words before we go into the presentations. We also have Kanishk Sharma, Director of Planning Data and Research with the Department of Planning. He is going to give us an update on the department's collaboration with the Census Bureau, along with Michael Ratcliffe of the Census Bureau. Now, we have a second poll question coming up now.
Yes, and please respond to what part of the state do you live in. You may need to escape from full screen mode in order to respond to the poll. You can't click on it when you're in full screen mode. And what we find here is that 67% come from Central Maryland, 12% are attending from outside of Maryland, 9% from the Eastern Shore or the eastern part of Maryland, 7% from Western Maryland, and 5% represent those from Southern Maryland.
All right, thank you, John. Thank you for reading the results. We have to, I see that Secretary McCord hasn't joined the conference yet. So we will start our first presentation from Jason Devine of the Census Bureau on the demographic and housing characteristics files.
Thank you.
And
oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, we were going to ask a poll question before we get started with this, but yeah.
So the poll that you see before you is, how do you use the Census Bureau's demographic and housing data? Do you use it for population projection, comprehensive plan updates, socioeconomic research, or other? Please respond, and you may have to exit from full screen mode using the escape key in order to respond to the poll. Thank you. I see a lot of people are starting to click in. Thank you so much for your participation. And I'm going to read these off. 38% are using this data for socioeconomic research, 31% for comprehensive plan updates, 19% for population projections, and then 12% have some other use for the data.
Thank you, John. Jason, can you share your screen and start your presentation?
I can. Give me just a second.
Yeah, no camera, please, Jason. I keep turning it off.
Okay. So my screen should be coming up now. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, can we see full slides? Oh, thank you. There it is. It seems to be off kilter, but we're seeing it's kind of chopped off.
Well, let's see how it goes as I go through. Let me know if you can't see anything. But well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today to talk about the demographic and housing characteristics file. This is an important 2020 census data product and one that we've been very focused on over the last year. This is a really important time to be talking about the demographic and housing characteristics file because as many of you may know, we've been working on a new disclosure avoidance system to support this product. And we're in the final stages of that work. We will go to our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee tomorrow to make determinations on the final settings for that disclosure avoidance system. And I'm going to talk about that through our presentation, and it will make more sense to you as I go through if you're not familiar with the work we've been doing. So you should see slide number 3 here with some background information. We're legally obligated to protect all data under US Code Title 13, but technology computing power has advanced to the point where current methods didn't provide strong enough protection, so we had to consider new methods for disclosure protections. We've added a new tool called differential privacy to our toolbox, and we were using it in our 2020 census data products to protect against disclosure. DP, or differential privacy, inserts small differences in the counts of people and households, making it very difficult to re-identify people. But data users have been very concerned about how this approach will impact the usefulness of the data, especially for small levels of geography or small population groups. We're working to make the data as useful as possible within those disclosure protection constraints, though. And to help understand user needs, we have created demonstration products that show the proposed balance between data usefulness and protection. This slide will just give you an idea of where we are in our efforts now. So as I mentioned, today we're focusing on the demographic and housing characteristics file, which has a planned release date of May of 2023. The apportionment product and the redistricting file have already been released. And then there's some products that seem to be switching back and forth between modes in my presentation. Not sure what you guys are seeing. So I should be back now on the slide that shows the timing of the data products. And
it's going back and forth. I think that you're not sharing the proper screen. It keeps flipping back to slide sorter. So we keep seeing your first slide.
Yeah, it's strange. How about now? See, it goes to that when I switch back, and then it switches back to the other one.
Yeah, now we're looking at 2020 census products released in future effort.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's see. It was kind of flipping back. Strange. But there's some other products that we're focusing on after this product, the detailed DHC and detailed DHC A and B, and then the supplemental DHC. And these products include more detail than the demographic and housing characteristics file. And then there's some future products, special tabs, as well as a public use microdata sample file that will be the focus of future efforts, although we've started to turn our attention to those already. This is a timeline that shows where we are in this effort. And like I said, this is why this is an important time to be talking about the DHC. We're in this final stage, which I've circled there. We've been working to tune this disclosure avoidance system for the last year or so. And now we're in those final steps, and we've really made a lot of improvements over the last few weeks and through the work on the different demonstration products. So we're at that point now where we're getting ready to set those final settings for our disclosure avoidance system, and then we'll go into production. So a little bit about what the DHC product includes. It provides tables with demographic and housing information from the 2020 census. This includes sex, age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship to householder, household type, household size, tenure, which is owner or renter occupied, and vacancy status. It also provides counts by race and Hispanic origin, along with housing unit counts. But those were released as part of the redistricting product. So those, the disclosure protections for those counts have already been set, but they'll be carried forward exactly as they were in the redistricting product. Some tables are provided by the following categories or combination categories, and you see it covers the major race categories there that we produce data for. Geography will vary by table, but many tables will be available at all geographies. So that will include the nation, state, county, tract, block group, down to the block level, places, American Indian, Alaska Native areas, and Native Hawaiian areas. But it does not include data on detailed race, ethnicity, or American and Alaska Native tribes and village populations. These will be available in those detailed products that I mentioned on the last slide. So I mentioned the demonstration products. So this has been an important part of the work on this implementation of the new disclosure avoidance methodology. What we do is we apply the new disclosure avoidance protections to 2010 data tables, and then we provide metrics or measures of differences from those tables, and also release those tables so people can do their own analysis. So we release both the metrics that we develop ourselves as well as the demonstration tables so people can see the impact of the new disclosure avoidance system. The public then analyzes those differences and can look to see if how different these new protected values are from the values that were released in 2010. That lets people see the impact of this new disclosure avoidance methodology. Something that wasn't really possible with previous disclosure avoidance methodologies, but now you can see the level of noise that's being added to protect the data from disclosure. And that's been what the public has been assessing and commenting on through our feedback periods. So we've just closed out our feedback period for the second demonstration product. This product was released in August, and the demonstration or the feedback period ended September 26th. It included some new tables that we added to the product based on user feedback. We increased accuracy across many topics. And we also, when we released this demonstration product, we made enhancements to supporting material, such as the 2020 Census Data Planning Crosswalk, which allows you to see how the 2020 products will relate to the 2010 product tables. And this time we released the person and house unit summary files at the same time, maybe a little too much detail for this meeting, but as you get more into how this new disclosure avoidance methodology, it starts to become important to understand the difference between person files developed or tables developed from the person files and tables developed from the house unit files, which are protected independently, which can sometimes lead to some inconsistencies between the products. So that was the second DHC demonstration product. And as I mentioned, that comment period closed on September 26th. We've been reviewing that feedback and responding to the feedback and incorporating updates or changes to the disclosure avoidance system to improve accuracy in certain areas. And that's the final settings that I mentioned that we'll be potentially making tomorrow. We'll go to our DSEP meeting and they'll make the final decisions about the level of the privacy loss budget that will be used with this product. So what we asked the public to do is we asked them to look at the differences between the demonstration data and the 2010 census tables, and to let us know if the numeric differences were the same in the 2020 census tables as those that they saw in that demonstration product. Would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would be acceptable? And would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would not be acceptable? And how would that impact their use of the data? So this feedback is what let us sort of know where we had to bring some additional privacy loss budget or some additional tuning to the disclosure avoidance system to increase accuracy in those areas. In the end, though, the level of accuracy we can provide is also determined by the disclosure that goes along with that. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to make the data as accurate as possible within the disclosure limitations. This was the last demonstration data product and the last opportunity to provide feedback before those disclosure avoidance system are set and finalized for the DHC. So that's an important thing to understand about where we are in the process now with the work on the demographic and housing characteristics file. And for those of you who have been involved with this for the last year or so, you know what we've been going through and what we've been providing to the public to provide feedback and to help them understand the new disclosure avoidance system. For those of you who have not been involved, this may come as a lot of new information, but there's a lot of information on the Census Bureau's webpage about this effort. So if you just go to the Census Bureau's webpage and you type in disclosure avoidance, it'll take you to a page where you can find a lot of material that sort of describes this effort that we've been going through to implement this new disclosure avoidance methodology. So I now have some accuracy metrics from that second demonstration product. And keep in mind as I go through these that we have made, based on the second round feedback, we have made quite a bit of improvement across different variables. So as we set make the final determinations for the setting for this product, we will update our presentations to include some of those new metrics, some of the sort of what would represent the final settings for the DHC, so people can see those improvements. But right now, what we're able to provide are the results from the second demonstration product. So what I have here is a table that shows some of the accuracy measures that we use, and I'll go through a few of the different variables. And recently, we've started to provide some measures of the outlier values, because those were really important to data users. When you apply this, the error for disclosure protections, what are some of the largest differences that we're seeing? So one of the ways we're communicating this is by showing the 95th percentile absolute error and the 95th percentile absolute percent error. We show absolute errors and percent errors because it depends on a lot of times the size of these different cells or geographies, you got to kind of keep in mind if they're really, really small cells, then even a small bit of noise infused will create large percent differences. So you can see here we're looking
Hey, Jason, we've lost your audio. It appears that Jason has been kicked out of the system. So I don't know what you want to do, Al or Krishna.
Let's give him a minute to see if he can get back on. If not, we have to move on to the next topic on our agenda. I think we will go on to the next agenda item here, and we will skip the updates part. We will come to that for the Census Bureau's collaboration. Maybe if Michael Burrows is ready, we can start with that presentation on working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have a poll question. What is your organization's current work situation? Please select one of the following. And we will wait a few minutes for the poll questions to be answered, for the responses. And as we see on our responses, we have 7% who telework only, 10% who are in the office 5 days a week, and an 83%, the vast majority of us, who work using a hybrid model. Few days teleworking and a few days at work. Our next presenter is Michael Burrows with the U.S. Census Bureau, and he will be talking about working from home during the pandemic.
Thank you. Just trying to get the proper screen presented. Just one moment.
Yep, we're continuing to see your GPS.
Yep, I'm just unplugging the dual monitor to try it again with this technique.
You could always select the other monitor.
All right, looks like it's presenting now. All right, well, thanks for the invitation to speak on work from home trends. My name is Michael Burrows. I'm with the Journey to Work and Migration Statistics branch with the U.S. Census Bureau. I'm also joined by my branch chief, Brian McKenzie, who's going to join for the last 5 minutes or so for any outstanding questions from the presentation. I've been with the branch for about 4 years now. Brian's been with the branch for about 10 years more than that. So really, he brings a wealth of knowledge on some of the sort of long-term commuting trends and the history of the ACS. It's been a pretty exciting time to be working on the ACS, and we're very excited about this most recent data release. Of course, the pandemic was challenging in a lot of ways, as I imagine has been the experience across the different institutions represented here today. But we've, of course, been really excited for this publication of data so we can better understand what's been going on over the course of the pandemic so far. I'm a bit biased due to my content area, but it strikes me as pretty fascinating that some of the more enduring social and economic changes due to the pandemic could end up being in the realm of commuting, specifically with that explosion of working from home that so many people are interested in today. So in the presentation ahead, I'm going to focus on the 2019 and 2021 ACS one-year estimates. I'm skipping over 2020 due to the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on data collection. And we have sort of a longer explanation of those experimental estimates that's available, which I can explain at the end of the presentation if that's useful. I also want to point out now that all the data that I'm going to walk through are available on our public tables on data.census.gov. And I've tried to put the table numbers in each slide wherever there's any data that might be of interest. So any additional comparisons you might want to make should be very straightforward to do so by going to data.census.gov, looking up that table, and selecting whatever geography you're interested in. We've also got a report that's going to be coming out sometime in the next few weeks to a couple of months. It's specifically focused on working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. The report is going to contain a lot more detail on some of these topics. It goes beyond the public data. It does have a national focus instead of the emphasis on Maryland, but it should be of interest to many in the audience today. And I'd like to start by walking through some of the commuting content that's collected by the ACS. So the questions that I'm going to walk through here, I'm not going to go through all the data that is derived from them in this presentation, but I thought it might be useful to walk through the data that are available. So commuting questions first showed up in census surveys in 1960 as part of the decennial census long form, which meant that a sample of the population were asked one or more questions related to commuting. In 1960, that question was limited to the means of transportation to work, as shown on the left here. And by 2000, the question set had expanded to be more or less the same as what we see today on the American Community Survey, which is to say after 2000, this question, or rather these questions disappeared from the decennial census, and it's only on the ACS. In addition to means of transportation to work, we attempt to collect place of work information from every respondent age 16 and over who has been at work in the last week. This information is geocoded, and that lets us have an origin and a destination relationship for every working respondent. These relationships we refer to as commuting flows, and they often provide an important resource for state and local planners. And they're also critical to supporting OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget's construction of the country's metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. That's a process that's going on now. So back to our means of transportation to work question. This is really one of our heavy hitters. It captures how people travel to work, and it garners a lot of interest in the policy and research community. Of course, many people use more than one mode to travel to work. These people are asked to provide the method used for most of the distance. Many people also have more than one job, in which case they're asked to respond based on their primary job. So for folks that select car, truck, or van, the question that follows then asks the number of riders, and that lets us differentiate between people who drive alone to work and those who carpool. We also ask people what time they leave for work, and we ask them how long the journey takes them. All of these questions are asked of people who are at work age 16 and older. And the questions on time of departure and travel time are asked only of those who do not work from home for pretty obvious reasons. So this presentation is going to focus on those who worked from home. This, of course, changed pretty massively since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I want to get into some of the details associated with these changes, drawing exclusively from our pretty rich set of public tables. But to open things up from the data perspective, in addition to the increase in working from home, there have been a number of interesting changes in overall commuting patterns since the start of the pandemic. So I would like to begin by describing some of those overarching changes very quickly for you. All the data in the next handful of slides come from our table S0801, which is a really great starting point for researching commuting trends. And please keep in mind as I move through these slides that the y-axes are going to change for most of the charts that we see. So this is how people in the US and Maryland traveled to work in 2021. There are some small differences in the distribution of means of transportation to work, but overall, we can see that Maryland was not really strikingly different from the US as a whole in most categories. One notable exception here is working from home, where the rate was about a third higher in Maryland compared to the United States as a whole. The steep increase in working from home came, of course, during the pandemic. Again, we're skipping over 2020 because those data are considered experimental. But before 2021, Maryland was actually a little bit lower than the national average in terms of working from home, but generally pretty close since 2006. The nature of the question, as I outlined earlier, is somewhat limiting in terms of capturing the full extent of working from home. I noted in the earlier poll that the vast majority of people here today are in sort of hybrid workplace. And so for many of you, that may mean you'd report working from home. And for many others, it may report you report working from the office. But it's striking, even in terms of the limitation of the question, it's striking that the rate is about 3 times higher at the national level and about 4 times higher for Maryland in 2021 compared to 2019, again, for these that primarily work from home. And of course, this increase in working from home means that other means of transportation were on the decline. Driving alone was still by far the most common way to get to work, but at the national level, it dropped by about 6 percentage points, from 3 and 4 workers in 2019 to about 2 and 3 workers in 2021. And for Maryland, that percentage dropped even more, from about 74 percentage points to 62. Looking now at public transportation, which for our purposes includes a wide variety of modes, such as bus, subway, elevated rail, long distance train, commuter rail, light rail, streetcar, trolley, and ferry boat. So a very wide possibility of options, and different places have a different selection of these. So while public transportation makes up a much smaller percentage of overall commutes relative to modes like driving alone, the effect of the pandemic in relative terms was enormous. At the national level, the share of workers commuting by transit was cut in half to 2.5% between 2019 and 2021. And that's after it hovered at the low but pretty stable level of about 5 percentage points for over a decade since the ACS began. In Maryland, we can see that the drop was even steeper, from about 8 percentage points down to about 3. And even at 3, that percentage in 2021 was still above the national average. It's worth noting again that the mix of public transportation in Maryland is likely to differ significantly from that of the nation as a whole. I grew up in North Carolina, where at the time there's really not much other than bus for public transportation. And when I was working at Census HQ, I could hop on the metro from DC. So certain options available in Maryland that just aren't available elsewhere. So looking here at mean travel time to work, people that work from home are not included in this universe. So what we see here is the average of reported one-way travel time among those who do not work from home. The geographies in this chart refer to the places people live and not necessarily where they work, although of course many people do live in the same geographic entity in which they work. We'll get more onto that in a second. But we see that the number for travel time dropped somewhat precipitously at the national level in 2021. So commuters actually in 2021 experienced their shortest commute in about a decade on average. The drop was much steeper in Maryland, although it does remain notably above the national average. So now, taking sort of the same slide, but I wanted to add in the DC Metro and the Baltimore Metro. It's interesting, even if it's intuitive, to see that the values for Maryland as a whole lie so visibly between these two large metros. As past analysis in our branch has shown a strong relationship between different modes of transportation and travel time. There's a 2021 report on travel time to work, which points this out, where we found that public transportation is associated with some of the longest commutes. So we would expect to see higher average travel times in places where more people take public transportation. The DC Metro is in fact one of the top metros in the nation for public transportation, so the higher travel time there is unsurprising. In general, the increase in work from home has also been accompanied by an increase in the share of workers who work in their county of residence. This increase has been much larger in Maryland than in the country as a whole, although overall levels remain substantially lower. So there's just a lot of cross-county and cross-state commuting in Maryland relative to the country as a whole. The Baltimore metro area too has seen a substantial, roughly 12 percentage point increase in the share of workers who live and work in the same county. So the previously mentioned commuting flows can shed some additional light on this relationship. So I wanted to take a quick look at an example of those. So this example is drawing from our 2011 to 2015 5-year data, looking specifically at Baltimore City as an origin. So Baltimore City in our commuting flows is treated as a county for classification purposes. And I've sorted here by flow size, and that is to say the number of workers commuting from one origin to one destination. And we're just looking at a handful of the larger flows as an example. Unsurprisingly, we see that many more workers commute within Baltimore than anywhere else, but a large number commute elsewhere too, typically within Maryland itself, but also of course to DC. It's also worth noting here the large margins of error on these estimates. This is pretty characteristic of such granular estimates that we publish. And so they really must always be interpreted with caution, which is why we include those margins of error for you. The updated 2016 to 2020 commuting flows product should be publicly available sometime in 2023 after the publication of OMB's new Metro Micro delineations. We do have a similar flow product for migration that comes out annually. And this product shows the geographic mobility of people who have moved from state to state, from county to county and metro to metro. We also anticipate a lot of interest in that product this year too, with all the changes due to COVID. And of course, it raises a lot of interesting questions about the interactions between migration and commuting, which we hope to spend more time researching in the future. So now I'd like to move on to some more specific information on the nature of home-based workers in 2019 and 2021. And I'm going to focus here on Maryland, shifting away from that more national perspective. I'm going to stick to public tables here, which means you can find all the information I'm going to run through on data.census.gov. And data.census.gov workgov also has a lot of other very useful tables that I've not included in this presentation. The report out in it describes some more nuanced trends that we don't go into here. So we learned prior to the pandemic that home-based workers tended to be older than their commuting counterparts. This was an interesting finding in a report on the commuting habits of older workers, which we published in late 2020. Here, I'm showing the median age of home-based workers in 2019 and 2021. At the national level, that statistic dropped by about 4 years. That's indicating that the overall home-based workforce was much younger in 2021 than it was in 2019. The median age dropped, but that change is still substantial at about 3 years. And this is one way that we've observed the characteristics of the home-based workforce converging somewhat with the overall workforce, although in other ways they're diverging. And looking at now one of the ways that they're diverging, we turn to the prominence of women among home-based workers. It's one way that the home-based workforce is really starting to distinguish itself from commuters. So at the national level, women are about 3 percentage points more likely to work from home than men. In Maryland, that's a difference of 5 percentage points. Our public tables do reveal that there was a distinction before the pandemic as well, but that difference is greater in 2021 compared to prior years. So the increasing prominence of women in the home-based workforce is a trend to keep an eye on in coming years. Moving beyond some of these demographics and focusing strictly on Maryland, I'd like to walk through a few ways now that we can better understand who is working from home. Because of the nature of the tables that I'm going to be using here are base tables, I'm going to switch to population counts rather than percentages. The base tables generally provide these counts so that the data user can calculate whatever percentages they'd like from the counts. The numbers I'm going to report are estimates of the numbers of workers, and here I'm going to present them in thousands for ease of interpretation. And it's always going to be in Maryland, and it's always going to be the number fitting into each group we're walking through. So while we're sticking to the public tables in terms of what we can report, you're going to see that we can really follow some pretty distinct economic characteristics among this group. So starting with occupation, occupation is measured at the individual level. It's defined by the Census Bureau as the kind of work a person does to earn a living at their primary job. Intuitively, some occupations are better suited to working from home than others. Still, it's quite striking that the number of people working from home is about 5 times larger in the management, business, science, and arts occupations in 2021 compared to 2019. So that's an absolute increase of over 400,000 workers. We also see a roughly 300% increase in the sales and office occupations, going from about 30,000 in 2019 to 120,000 in 2021. Other occupations have far fewer home-based workers, and they saw smaller increases. And this is probably unsurprising for certain jobs, certain occupations like service, construction, transportation, and military. Now, industry is distinct from occupation in that it's measured at the sort of business or firm level. It's considered the kind of business conducted by a person's primary employing organization. There are many more industry groups here than there are occupation groups from the prior slide, so I'm not going to walk through them all. But there are some categories with fairly notable increases, including the professional, scientific, management, administrative, waste management industry, going from about 55,000 to 211,000. The educational services, healthcare, social assistance industry from about 30,000 to 125,000. And striking in the relative increases, the public administration industry going from about 10,000 to over 120,000. So some of these categories do really jump out, but it's also worth noting that every category grew between 2019 and 2021. Because of the connection and overlap between occupation and industry, it's also pretty helpful to dive into the cross tabulations here. So what industry a person works in and what occupation they do. And we've done that at the national level in our forthcoming report, which garners some sort of interesting conclusions. But in any case, while these differences are intuitive, they're still pretty striking. And they've really encouraged us to consider some of the likely downstream economic implications of these changes. One way or another, for all of its benefits and all of its costs, certain groups are experiencing home-based work just at much, much higher rates than others. Class of work also provides some pretty interesting insights. Most remote workers were in the private for-profit class of work in 2019 as well as 2021. And that class also saw the largest absolute increase in home-based workers between 2019 and 2021. Notably here, the number of federal government workers working from home is about 10 times greater in 2021 than 2019. Again, a very striking relative increase. It's reminiscent of what we observed on the industry slide here, and likely attributable to the pretty fast and sweeping response of the federal government at the outset of the pandemic to make working from home an option for many of its workers. A lot of the public discussion about working from home has emphasized that poorer workers have generally been left out of these changes. And considering poverty status reinforces this understanding. Certainly, a lot more people living below the poverty line and just above the poverty line are working from home in 2021 compared to 2019. But most home-based workers were at or above the 150% threshold before and after the pandemic. Now, granted, this is a very big group here. The vast majority of households in Maryland and at the national level are at or above 150% of the poverty line. And for this reason, we do offer a deeper analysis of income and home-based work in our upcoming report. But sort of suggestively providing some of the same conclusions, we look here at home-based workers by tenure in Maryland. So similarly, about 571,000 home-based workers owned the home they worked in 2021, compared to about 156,000 that rented the home they worked in. Although the vast majority of home-based workers were homeowners in both years, though, the relative increase was actually larger for renters, about a 5 times increase compared to about a 4 times increase for homeowners. Finally, I wanted to look at just a handful of different ways of considering work from home trends along geographic lines. I'm starting here with a map from Social Explorer, so we don't own the site, but they do use our data. And these data are from our 2019 5-year file, so it's a bit dated, but I thought it provided a nice sense of where working from home was more prevalent in Maryland in that 2019 5-year data. Without getting too much into the specifics of this map, I think it's worth noting that the rates look to get a little bit higher the farther we get from large cities. That is to say, remote work before the pandemic looked to be a little more common outside of those big city cores. Now, here are some underlying numbers from the 2019 and 2021 1-year files. In this case, we're looking at the percentage of workers in each community type who worked from home. To be clear, I'm walking through 2 different categorization methods here. Urban and rural is one method, and then the metro and principal city classifications are another. And we see that in 2019, so-called rural areas, so basically places with lower population density, had slightly higher rates of working from home compared to urban areas. This difference reversed itself in 2021. This change, again, could be intuitive as people living and working in big cities suddenly stayed at home to do more or less the same job from their home. But it is a pretty notable departure from the pre-pandemic status quo. Looking at metro status, we see a significant jump in working from home in metro areas, both in their principal cities and elsewhere. To me, this provides a kind of interesting counter-narrative to the popular story of people sort of moving out to the countryside to work from home. Although, of course, this is happening on the margins too. And that's something that we go into a little bit in our forthcoming report. So I've included in this chart some non-Maryland metros just for purposes of comparison. Any bars in blue are non-Maryland, and anything in yellow is a metro composed all or in part of Maryland counties. I've also added some margins of error to these estimates since the numbers are a lot closer and because I thought the statistical comparability might be useful to this audience. The DC Metro has the highest rate of working from home of any metro composed all or in part of Maryland counties, and it's actually not far from the top metro area in the country. Again, I think the federal government's widespread transition to working from home is likely to have played a pretty sizable role in this. The Philadelphia, Baltimore, and California Lexington Park metros are lower, but close to or above the national average. And on the lower end of things, we see Hagerstown, Salisbury, and Cumberland metros, which are well below the national average for working from home. In general, the industry and occupational specificity of these geographic areas, which I'm not so familiar with, are likely to play a pretty big role in these differences that we're seeing. We can also look at county rates for Maryland counties with populations over 65,000. Montgomery County is at the top of the list at about twice the national average. This is likely a function of its proximity to DC and the industrial occupational composition, again, of its workers. The much more rural Allegheny County, pretty distant from Maryland's large metros, is at the low end. I'm not so familiar, again, with sort of the underlying socioeconomic reasons for this. I saw there were about there were a handful of folks from Western Maryland who can maybe understand that context a little bit better. But a pretty wide spread of working from home if you look at it by county that seems to follow some pretty distinct geographic patterns. So this slide wraps it up for the data that I've prepared for working from home. And in just a moment, Brian and I would be happy to take any questions that may have come up. We have put out a few releases over the last couple of years on a variety of topics. Here's a quick summary of them. In 2021, we put out 2 longer reports, one on public transportation and one on travel time to work. Given the big changes in both of these areas since 2019, these end up being pretty important basemarks for evaluating changes that occurred during the pandemic. We also put out a brief piece on working from home during the pandemic using the Household Pulse Survey, which was initiated due to the COVID-19 pandemic and looks to continue in 2023 with a sort of evolving set of questions, including some on working from home. In 2020, we put out a longer report on the commuting patterns of older workers, as well as a shorter America Counts piece about older workers with a disability. And prior to that, we did a short piece on younger workers biking to work in cities. There's also a couple other data sources that I wanted to point out. I do not work on all these surveys. I have brief experience with some of them, but I've spent a lot of time working on the SIP, the Survey of Income and Program Participation. This is really a wealth of data for better understanding some of the details of working from home. And we're still in the process of figuring out how best to present these data to understand some of the impacts of the pandemic. But one of the big benefits of the SIP is that it's collecting multiple modes of transportation. So we can see if people are working from home some days and commuting others, and also collects data on multiple jobs. So if people have a job that they commute to and one that they work from home for, we're able to observe that. The American Housing Survey has a module that's similar to, but less detailed than the SIP. And I know that the current population survey is in the process of figuring out a work from home question for future renditions of the survey. And the American Time Use Survey is another great resource for very detailed work from home information. So with that, I invite you all to visit our topical page for tables that aren't available on data.census.gov. And please feel free to follow up after this presentation with any questions or comments to my email address or phone number there. And I think at this time, Brian and I will be making ourselves available for any questions that may have come up.
Thank you, Michael. If you can turn on your cameras, I will ask you a couple of questions. We have a few questions that have come up. The first question is from Sean Kimberly, who asks, is there a plan to update the ACS questionnaire to try and capture the hybrid work arrangement?
Hi, this is Brian McKenzie. I can take that question. So occasionally the ACS goes through in some cases minor, in some cases major revamp, depending on the content test iteration. The last change we made to our commuting content had to do with just a very minor change, which was adding ride hailing as an option, basically combining it with the existing taxi category. For a more sweeping change, like the one in the question, where we're really restructuring the way we ask about working from home, that would require an additional content test, and we have talked about it, and we are continuing to think about the best way to move forward with that. But there's, I'm unable to say sort of when it will occur and what it will look like, but I'll just say that we're very much looking forward to the opportunity to embrace some sort of hybrid model, because internally, within the Census Bureau, as well as externally, among our transportation partners, we recognize the need for such a change. Yeah, and again, it may require a wholesale structural change, specifically in our travel mode question, because that's where the current work at home information is derived from. It's essentially considered to be another travel mode, which we know we could improve upon that structure.
Thank you. We have a question from Jesse, who asks, are there any reports identifying workers at home with multiple jobs? From
our area, we don't we don't currently have any out there, at least not any recent reports. We do have information that would collect multiple job information for workers within the SIP, the Survey of Income and Program Participation, but we don't currently have any reports that summarize such information. Michael, are you aware of any?
No reports that I'm aware of. It's certainly something that we're interested in producing more publications on, but there are 2021 SIP data available for research along those lines. So I would point interested parties in that direction.
And our final question is from Leah, who asks, do you know how government entities or companies are using this data to inform policy decisions?
Yeah, we're excited about the diverse set of applications of our data. We've long worked with not just the federal government, federal DOT, but also state and local level and regional level planning agencies. One big example is our commuting data feeds into the Census Transportation Planning Program, the CTPP, which is a partnership that we have with AASHTO. We also, really on a weekly basis, talk to multiple people from local and regional agencies who include our data in their transportation models, and their predictive models for traffic analysis and travel behavior, whatever else they're up to at the local level. So we're excited about the diverse set of applications of our data. Increasingly, I would say within the last decade or so, our data has also been applied to some really interesting and important social justice related work, both at the local and state level, as well as at the federal level with DOT. So yeah, it just varies across data users, but we're excited to get it out there and hear about how people are using it.
Well, thank you so much. We have a couple of other questions, but we will submit those to you via email later on. I do want to thank both of you for your presentation, and for all in the audience. We will be making Michael's presentation available on our website later today. Before we go on to our next poll question, I just wanted to say, Michael, I love your house.
Thank you. You're seeing my attic, but it's a lovely space. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for giving us the time.
Can we get our next poll question, please?
Nope, the next poll goes before Ryan Burson, so we're going to go back to Jason for now.
Hello, can you hear me? Are you ready for me to
Yes, Jason, we can hear you. Can you put your slideshow up?
Yes. Let me see. I'm on a different device now, so we'll see if this works the same way. Can you presentation?
Yep, we can get it. Could you put it in presentation mode? Thank you. That's it. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Sorry about last time. I was going through the presentation. I guess at some point you lost my voice, lost my sound. So I think I was about here whenever I might have dropped off last time. So I'll pick up from here. So this shows the timeline that we're working on for the work on the DHC, and we're in a very important time at this point, in that we're going to our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee to make the final settings for the disclosure avoidance system that's going to protect this product. We've gone through a few different demonstration products that have allowed people to provide feedback on the level of noise that's been added to protect for disclosure, and now we're finalizing those settings. Let me say a little bit just about what's included in the DHC. It provides tables with demographic and housing information from the 2020 census. This includes sex, by age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship to household data, household type. This is different types of families, household size, tenure, which is owner or renter occupied, and vacancy status. I'll mention that counts by race and Hispanic origin, along with housing unit counts, were released in the redistricting product, but they'll also be included in this product, the DHC, and they'll be carried forward exactly as they were in the redistricting product, since those protections have already been applied. Some of the tables in the DHC will be provided by the following race categories and combinations of these categories, and you can see those there. I'm going to check in every few seconds to make sure, or every few slides to make sure you can still hear me. But
I can hear you
with this next slide.
but we can see your truncated slides.
Okay. Well, I think we had that issue last time, but we'll see if I can keep going through it, how it works. The geography varies by table, but many tables are available at all geographies. So that would include the nation, state, county, tract, block, group, block, down to the lowest level, which is block. Places, American Indian, Alaska Native areas, and Native Hawaiian areas. The DHE, though, does not include data on detailed race, ethnicity, or American Indian, Alaska Native tribe and village populations. These detailed groups and data for these groups will be available in the detailed DHCA and detailed DHC products, data products. So now a little bit about the demonstration data products. I mentioned these earlier. This is how we've been able to communicate to the public the level of noise that's being infused for disclosure avoidance protections. So as I mentioned in an earlier slide, that this is one of the areas the public has been very concerned about. So what we've done to let them see this level of noise is we applied the new disclosure avoidance protections to 2010 census data. And then the Census Bureau produced measures of the differences from these census tables. And we also released those tables. So we release all the tables that are going to be released as part of 2020, but using the 2010 data. And then you can compare those tables back to the already released 2010 data to see the level of noise that's been infused for disclosure avoidance protections. The public then can analyze these differences to see how far off the new numbers are with the new disclosure avoidance protections applied, and can assess the impact then for different uses of the data and provide feedback to us on these demonstration products. But as I mentioned, the second feedback period for the second demonstration product closed late last month. Second demonstration product was released on August 25th, and feedback was due by September 26th. It did include some additional tables that were included, added to the DHC product based on data user feedback. We lowered the proposed level of geography from state or county level to the census tract level for a number of tables, and we added a sex by single year of age table that was repeated by race and ethnicity at the tract level. Again, that was based on data user feedback. We increased accuracy across many topics from the first demonstration product, and we made enhancements to the supporting material, which is the 2020 Census Data Planning Crosswalk. And we have a lot of material available. If you go to the Census Bureau's webpage and in the search, you type in disclosure avoidance, it'll take you to a webpage that has a lot of different material that will help you sort of understand what we're doing with this new disclosure avoidance methodology and the work on the demonstration products, as well as the different accuracy metrics that we provided, and links to a number of blogs and press releases and other material that we made available to support this effort. How are we doing? Can you still hear me? Can you still see the presentation slides?
Yes.
Thank you. So with the public feedback request, we asked that the public analyze the differences between the demonstration data and the 2010 census data. And if to ask themselves the question, if the numeric differences were the same in the 2020 census tables as those in the demonstration data product, would there be tables or geographies where this would be acceptable? Would there be tables or geographies where this would not be acceptable? And how would this impact your use of the data? So just to kind of go over this again, put it maybe in simpler terms, we produced these demonstration products, which the 2010 census data, apply the new disclosure methodology to these tables, and then we release those to the public to compare back to the already available 2010 census tables to be able to see how the new disclosure avoidance system impacts the accuracy of those tables, because that was one of the things that the public was concerned about with this new disclosure avoidance methodology. We received that feedback back, use it with our own subject matter expertise and our own understanding of the uses of the data and the uses that data users communicate back to us. And then we continue to work to tune the disclosure avoidance system to improve accuracy where it's thought that greater accuracy is needed. And as I mentioned, this was the last demonstration data product and the last opportunity to provide feedback. before the disclosure avoidance settings for the DHC are finalized. After they're finalized, which actually our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee will be meeting tomorrow to make final determinations about this. Once that's done, we will go into production and we'll be working to produce the DHC tables for that May 2023 release date. I do have some results to share with you today from the second demonstration product, but I will point out that we've made quite a bit of improvements since that second demonstration product went out. So this will give you an idea of where we were at with the second demonstration product, but keep in mind though, as we go through this, that we've made improvements since that product. And as we make the determinations about the final settings for the disclosure avoidance system for this product, we will then start releasing metrics and demonstration products to support the final production settings for that product. So you'll see, if you are interested in any of that, as I go through these different tables, if you're interested in any of these topics, if you use data for any of these topics from the census, you're gonna wanna pay attention to the improvements that were made from the second demonstration product. So for example, if you see a measure here that you think would make the data unusable for you, then you'd wanna look for these same tables when we release metrics for the production settings and see how we've been able to improve the accuracy for those measures. And when I say improve accuracy, what I'm really talking about here is improve how we're able to both protect the privacy of the data and infuse noise across the whole collection of products that get released, because the new disclosure avoidance methodology considers all the different products and the privacy loss that's associated with all of those products. So it creates this situation where you have to work towards this balance of privacy and accuracy. So this table shows at the census tract level, the accuracy we were at with the second demonstration product for housing units that are owned with a mortgage, owned free and clear, and renter occupied. And what we show here is we show the mean absolute error, that first or second column. So at the county level or the census tract level for owned with a mortgage, the average error that was introduced was 1.65. So that's a fairly small amount of noise being introduced to protect privacy for this product. We also include here the 95th percentile of absolute error. So across these three rows here, 95% of the cases are within 4 housing units different from the actual enumerated value. We also show it in mean absolute percent error terms. So small percent errors here. And then we show it the 95th percentile absolute percent error. And you can see those values as well. This looks at opposite sex married couple households and some different coupled household types. The mean absolute here gets a little bit larger, mainly because these categories, the mean population for these categories gets smaller. So you can see the noise that's been added to these tables. I believe this is at the county level to maintain privacy. So for opposite sex married couples, the mean absolute error is 5.83 people, the same, or households, sorry. Same-sex married couple households is 3.62 households. Opposite sex unmarried partner households is 5.12. Same-sex unmarried partner households 3.61. If you look at the 95th percentile, you see that where 95% of the cases fall. And then you can look at the mean absolute percent error. It's a little bit larger, but these are fairly small groups. So the mean absolute percent error, because a lot of these groups are very small, are a little bit larger. Then if you look at the 95th percentile for the mean absolute percent error, you can see it is quite a bit larger. But that's where we're able to say 95% of the cases fall within that range. But as I mentioned, from the second demonstration product to the production settings, we have made quite a bit of improvements in accuracy for these tables. This shows a table that we produce that shows the count of households where owned children under 6 are present. This shows it across a few different geographies. We show school districts here because for this table, school districts there are a lot of interest in this table. And you can see here the mean absolute errors are quite a bit bigger than the other tables. As you go across, you see the 95th percentile, and then you see the mean absolute percent errors, and you see the 95th percentile for the mean absolute percent errors there as well. Next shows tenure by age of householder. Or in that first table I showed tenure for totals. Now you're breaking it down by age of householder, and this is what you see with this new methodology as you sort of break out the data and cross it by other variables. You tend to have larger mean absolute percent errors added to protect privacy. You see these continue to get a little bit larger with the mean absolute error ranging from, I think, 14 up to 21 or 22 point, well, actually 30, I see there. And you can go and look at the 95th percentile. For these tables, then you can look at the mean absolute percent errors. Still, the percent errors are fairly small because these are larger groups. So as you move up to cells that have larger population sizes, even though the mean absolute errors may be a little larger, the percent errors remain smaller. This looks at household size, less than 1,000. You see the mean absolute errors for these tables. It's at the county level. You can see some fairly large 95th percentile mean absolute percent errors here, but these are for groups that have fairly small populations. So for example, the 7 or more person households, the mean population is only 3. This shows tenure by race of householder. See the values there. Again, the mean absolute error is a little bit larger as these are broken out by race groups. And there are some mean absolute percent differences there that are larger, but again, those are small groups. So as you have these smaller groups, even adding small amounts of noise makes the percent error sometimes larger, quite a bit larger. All right, so we made some improvements that were reflected in the second demonstration product. Improvements were made to centenarians, tables, population 100 years of age or older, to the relationship to householder tables, to the detailed group quarters type, the age of householder, tables that show presence of own children, tables that show tenure, tables that provide household or house unit characteristics, and also improvements were made to unified school districts. There were some improvements that were made that were not reflected in the demonstration data product. And again, as I said, as we worked after the second demonstration product went out, after we received feedback on the second round demonstration product, improvements were continued. We continued to make improvements in accuracy across all of the variables. Some of the areas where we made improvements that weren't reflected in the demonstration product were for elementary and secondary school districts, a single year of age for children under 18 years of age, and for some lower levels of geography. So if you're interested in getting more into these demonstration products, getting more into understanding the noise that's been added to this product, I imagine this is going to be an important role that state data centers will play in helping data users understand this new disclosure of avoidance methodology and when they need to use the census data with a little bit of caution. The full detailed summary metrics are available now, but we will release at some point a production setting set of detailed summary metrics. There's also the 2010 census-based THC demonstration tables that were released as summary files. These are sometimes a little hard to use because they require additional processing, but it basically allows you to make comparisons directly between tables protected with the new disclosure avoidance methodology and those tables that have already been released from 2010. And it may be a little bit longer. We plan to release the detailed summary metrics sooner than the full set of demonstration production setting products that will let you see the final settings for the VHC. The people at IPUMS have worked to make comparison tables from these summary files that a lot of people consider easier to use, so that's a resource as well. And the Census Bureau provides summaries of results through our newsletters and webinars and presentations such as the one I'm giving today. And you can always reach out to Census Bureau staff, myself, or others, and we'll help you and use any of these resources or even help you understand this new methodology better, or even the data products themselves better if you would like that assistance. We are here to help you with this. So in conclusion, We have closed out our last opportunity for feedback on the DHC demonstration product, but that feedback has played an important part in our working to improve the disclosure avoidance system that will support this product. DSEP will make the final decisions about the settings for the disclosure avoidance system for this product in October, and like I said, tomorrow, actually. And we are looking forward to the release of the DHC in May, along with those other products, like I said, the production setting, accuracy metrics, as well as the production settings, memory files that will let the data users see where we ended up with the disclosure avoidance system to protect this product. And that'd be important information for people such as yourselves to help other data users understand how to work with this 2020 census data that's been protected using this new disclosure avoidance methodology. Thank you. I hope I made it to the end and you can still hear me.
Thank you, Jason. If you can turn on your camera, we have a couple of questions for you. Yes, sir. One of the questions was, you had talked about or discussed accuracy. Does the accuracy decrease across geographies? And also, does accuracy of variables change depending upon what geography we're looking at?
That's a great question. I don't have anybody here from our disclosure avoidance science team to get into more detail response to that question, but I can provide some high-level information. It has a lot to do with whether the geography is on something that we've come to refer to as the geographic spine, or whether it's a geography off of that spine. So for example, blocks, tracks, as you move up that spine, those building blocks, if you're on that spine, you're going to have, you'll likely have more accurate data than if you're a geography that's off of that spine. Although we've worked to move some geographies sort of closer to the spine to improve accuracy, but some geographies still remain off of that spine. That was one of the issues with the school districts, is they were initially not on the geographic spine, but we took steps to bring them closer to the geographic spine to improve accuracy for those geographies. In a lot of ways, what's driving the accuracy for any measure is the size of that cell involved. So you may see at even the county level, if you have a small population group, say you're looking at a particular race group by 5-year age group, and there's only a few people in that age group, the relative or percent accuracy of that group is going to be less. But you still likely only see a small numeric difference for that group for disclosure protection.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. We have a question from Sean Kimberly, who asks about, is the DHC data made available to other areas of the Census Bureau internally prior to the planned public release date of May 2023? And he says he asks this question because he was wondering if census products that might utilize this DHC data will have delays as well.
Well, that's another great question. Yes, a number of other programs in Census Bureau that use these data are able to work with the data internally. I don't know how many have actually been doing that. I know the estimates program has been working with the data internally, but other programs have ways that they can access 2020 census data without going through the DHC products. In other words, they can use an earlier file that may have the records prior to disclosure. They can come up with their own plan for protecting those tables themselves, and they can work with the earlier census files, such as the census edited file or the census unedited file. And that's also something that we're working on, developing the strategies with which people can work with the Census Bureau to request a special data tabulation, or can work through the FSRDC network to obtain access to the 2020 census data files for their own analysis or research purposes.
Well, thank you for that that response. Here we have a question from Bihoy, who asks, why why is there, why do other census products, such as the ACS, have fewer census data at the block group level? And building on this question, when we're talking about accuracy and the availability of, when we're talking about, because of the noise, how reliable is data at the block group level?
That's another excellent question, and that's something we hope to. We started to produce a series of briefs and other documents that will help data users understand at what levels, what size population groups, what levels of what size errors they can expect from the application of disclosure avoidance. Our messaging has included a lot about block level data and caution about using block level data as single block level analysis, using it, using any set of measures for a single block without aggregating data, aggregating blocks to larger geographies. There's some question about like what size group do you have to have before your data that's accurate enough to use. Of course, as you move up the block group, you move up the track level, they're going to tend to have larger populations. So as you move up to larger population sizes, for any variable, you would tend to have more accurate results. But it also, as I described earlier, even at like the county level, you may have tables that break out the data, cross it by multiple variables that still create small cells, which are going to be similar to, say, a count of the total population at even the census block group level. So you have to kind of understand as you move through different levels of geography and you're looking at different tables, what the population size of that table is. And that's where the demonstration products are really useful for helping people kind of understand this, and that the demonstration products provide the data for all the tables that we're going to release as part of the DHC product, but using the 2010 census data. So someone could take those demonstration products, make those comparisons if they were interested in a particular measure for a particular geography, and look across the country at all the examples of that geography and see the patterns of error that have been infused. Because we have made improvements from the second round of demonstration products, it would really be that production setting demonstration product, which would provide the most usable information, helping people kind of understand when the data is going to be accurate enough for their uses. And we don't, although we plan to release the actual accuracy metrics fairly soon, we don't have a timeline for producing the production setting summary files. Question is whether we produce those before or after we release the actual DHC product in May. Because we are going to be going into production and we're going to be very busy with that, it's likely that we won't be releasing the production settings summary files until after the release of the DHC itself.
Well, thank you so much. Any additional questions that we have, we will submit them to you for your review and response. Thank you so much, Jason, for your presentation. And we've been having, we've heard a lot of people have been having technical difficulties today, but I'm glad you were able to come back. For our next presentation, I'm going to go back to Al.
All right, thank you, Krishna. So we apologize for the technical difficulties. We had to shuffle our agenda to keep it moving along. So now we will go back to agenda item, which is the collaboration of Maryland Departments of Planning with the Census Bureau. And just a quick overview, what this got started was, like, we looked at our census estimates number that came out in 2020, and we compared it with the 2020 census number that was released almost a year and a half back, and they were off by a significant number. Our estimates were lower. And what our director, Kanishk Sharma, was worried about was, hey, if these numbers are lower, we are probably undercounting Maryland for the whole decade. and that might have a potential impact on the federal distribution of funds based on population. So we wanted to be proactive and see how we can rectify this. So we reached out to the Census Bureau and said, hey, what are the data items that you guys look at before the data is finalized? And we are really excited about this partnership and collaboration with the Bureau, where we look at the data at various components before it's released. So please take it away, Kanishk and Michael, to give us an overview of what you are envisioning for Maryland and the Bureau.
Oh, before Kanish, before you get started, for our viewing pleasure, could you please change your webcam to widescreen to match Michael's? It's in the webcam section of the control panel under the drop down for preferences.
I see it.
There we go.
Thank you. Make sure you click OK to accept.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Al, for the introduction. I'm actually going to let Michael speak more to this,
Okay.
only because I just got my bivalent COVID booster, and I'm feeling the after effects.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks, Kanishk. I hope you're feeling okay, and hope things hope things get better for you. The first day after a booster is always the toughest, I think. Yeah, so I'll cover what we're planning to do. We're really excited about this collaboration with Maryland Department of Planning. Because it's going to cut across a wide variety of interests within the Census Bureau and the state. So in talking with Al and Kanishk as we've been planning this, we thought, let's take a look at the entire process of collecting and managing address and other geospatial data. So the kind of information that tells us about what's being planned and built and what has been built, and then so basically what's on the ground from the standpoint of what we're interested in tracking and producing data for. So it's covering so what we're envisioning is identifying a model for address and geospatial data creation, maintenance, update, and flow from one organization to another that can be applied within the state of Maryland and would facilitate the Census Bureau's needs, but going beyond just our individual interests could then provide even a model for other states, other organizations. So when I'm talking about the entire flow, if we think about the process leading, our primary interest here from the Census Bureau standpoint and from the state standpoint is the population count, housing counts, and information that will improve the estimation of population and housing for the state of Maryland from whomever is producing that estimate, but most importantly on the Census Bureau's end, as well as the address list that we have for the state that underpins our censuses and surveys at the Bureau, but also just our address list in general that goes beyond the demographic censuses and surveys and is being built out to meet the needs of the entire enterprise at Census, so non-residential addresses as well. So when we think about that entire process, it starts at the local level. It starts with a building permit being issued, or actually it starts with somebody deciding that they want to build something. So it starts at that's the beginning of the process. And so we want to improve the entire flow of data from building permits, from the production of the issuance of building permits, or how that information flows up from the local level to the state and then is available to the Census Bureau. The Bureau conducts a building permit survey. This is over on the economic directorate side of the Bureau, and also a survey of construction. So we're interested in that information that flows into the economic side of the Bureau, but then is utilized over on the demographic side. Building permits factor into some of the population estimation processes. Building permits give us an early view of what's planned for development and addresses and places where addresses will eventually be issued. And so then, then the issuance of an address, how that flows from the local level, the county level, up to the state maintaining a database of addresses that the Census Bureau could then, and other agencies could then tap into. All of this, so we want to improve that flow. We want to make sure that we're all using the same best practices. We're following similar guidelines and standards. So that minimizes the need for review and just maximizes the efficiency and the utility of this information at all levels of government.
Thanks, Michael. And if I may add to that, from our perspective, there are a few challenges that we recognize. So one, the local jurisdictions, there really isn't a consistent way, the way they actually go about their building permit process. So I know, for example, I live in Howard County and they use a software tool called Acela, whereas at Anne Arundel County, until recently, they were still on mainframes and they were managing their information differently. So part of the challenge would be for us to actually get all of that data together, but at the same time, it all needs to be reformatted into one standard way where we can actually make sense of that data. At the same time, with the local jurisdictions, what we need to identify is what is an incentive for them to actually share that data with us, what's in it for them. And that's where I guess we are trying to be innovative. We are trying to think of new things that we could offer to them. First and foremost, of course, they'll have access to much better and more consistent data. Also, we are thinking that they may be interested in knowing what their neighboring jurisdictions are doing. So if, I live in Howard County and adjacent county actually has a big development coming up, that may impact traffic flows and other infrastructure in this county. So those are the kind of things that we are looking at. Also, from our perspective, this entire thing, I believe, will actually help us develop a better partnership with the local jurisdictions. And at the same time, for the US Census Bureau, I think this would be a good experiment to see some of the challenges that we're going to experience, and that may help the Bureau to, essentially come up with new procedures, processes, new techniques as you form similar partnerships with other states.
Yeah, I'll add there that, when we think about all of the different times that the Census Bureau reaches out to local governments to ask you to help us, if we can create a consistent flow of information from the local level up to the Department of Planning and a repository there, then, and it's all standardized and harmonized, all following the similar formats, then the Census Bureau could just simply tap into that database, working with the Department of Planning, rather than having to burden each of the localities, each of the municipalities and the counties, multiple times asking for building permits, asking for address lists, and so forth. So this can create more efficiencies for all of us. It can reduce the burden on reporting to multiple different levels of government. The Department of Planning asking you for information, the Census Bureau asking for information, other federal agencies asking for the same information. If we can all just be moving our data into a single location, then we can create efficiencies for all of us. And that then means that we can, from the Census Bureau standpoint, we can maintain your information, we can collect your information more frequently, we can maintain it more accurately and currently, and that then downstream affects the quality and the currency of population estimates and other data that we're releasing for your jurisdictions.
Thanks, Michael. And one last thing I wanted to mention quickly, one of the bigger challenges that I think we need to figure out how this works is, just because a building permit has been issued doesn't mean something has actually been built. there could be a permit out there just sitting, and that is something that we will have to work again with the local jurisdictions to figure out what triggers or flags or indicators are out there that essentially let us know that something is actually being built or has been built.
Mhm.
So I guess that's pretty much it for us,
Yeah.
in case there are any questions.
All right, before we get into the questions part, I would like to have a little comment. And as most of you know, Maryland is a diverse state, not only in population, but also in housing. Like we have extremities, like we have Ocean City, where we have a lot of seasonal housing. And also like we have Western Maryland, where there are a lot of secondary homes. And tracking these types of housing, and also the central part of Maryland, where there are high-rise buildings and condominiums type of development, that's hard to track. And we also have the component of the mixed use development, where you have commercial with residences mixed. And this opportunity or collaboration with the Census Bureau helps us track these types of situations, unique situations of housing units, and make sure that they are accurately counted and they go into the Census Bureau's various silos where they allocate population to housing units and things like that. So we are very excited about this project. Hopefully, we will have some good outputs and results once we collaborate and work on this. And with that said, we would like to move to questions. Krishna, do you have any questions for either Michael or Kanishk?
Sorry for the delay. Is the relation? So the question we have is the relationship between the census and planning specifically related to building permits, or are there other avenues where you're working together on?
No, it's not limited just to building permits. It would be addresses, so address information. We could look to other geospatial data, but it's primarily around the around addresses, and then as Kanish was saying, getting that early view into, we want to start the processes, the tracking of information as early as we can, so we know what's coming. So the building permit is that initial indicator that something is planned for development, for construction. As we know, it doesn't mean that it's coming to fruition, but that gives all of us an initial indicator that something's going to change, and then we can track that through the process. Of course, different parts of the Census Bureau are interested in different pieces of information along that entire flow. So as I mentioned, the economic area is collecting information about building permits and construction as an indicator of what's happening in the economy. Geography Division is interested in the addresses of those things that are built and the addresses of things that are already on the ground. We are going to be expanding our master address file to include a full complement of non-residential addresses so that we can meet the needs of the economic area. So this collaboration is looking at all aspects of this, the information about housing and non-residential facilities, group quarters. So we want to improve all of this information and improve the way that we manage and flow this information from one level of government to another. As Al mentioned a couple of the various areas that we're interested in. We've identified some study areas. We are interested in improving the information we have about seasonal housing, second homes. So we have a lot of the addresses for second homes, but what we don't necessarily know, so if we're talking about Deep Creek Lake area or Ocean City, an environment, we have a lot of those addresses, but we don't necessarily know if they are primary places of residence or if they are weekend homes or if they're seasonal rentals, or what the case may be. The more information we have about these addresses and their uses, the better we can provide, the better the information we can provide, whether it's estimates or occupancy and so forth. We're also interested in the nature of housing in Baltimore City and the vacancies and the and just the change in types of housing and how we track that information more effectively so that we can make sure that we have the most accurate address list possible, and that we're getting questionnaires and information out to residents, or if there's nobody residing there, we can manage our programs more efficiently. And then I mentioned, and then in the case of mixed use, another change that we're planning for the master address file is to flag addresses that have two types of uses that are both residential and non-residential. So kind of going back to Michael's and Brian's presentation earlier, if people are running businesses out of their homes, we want to be able to flag an address as both residential and commercial. So it has people residing at that address, and it also has business activity occurring at that address. And that's something that we don't currently do. And so that's a change that we want to make in our information and our database so that we can better serve the needs of the entire Census Bureau. And having that information, making sure that we have that information as accurate as possible, requires collaborating with the local jurisdictions and the state so that we're, and pulling all of the various information together about use that we can to make sure that we're attributing things as correctly as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that response. We do have a question from Kui Zhao. Kui Zhao asks, could the Census Bureau or MDP receive the local building permit and address list via a program like new construction or LUCA for a decennial census?
We could. One of the concerns that we have about LUCA, well, about any of these programs that are just at one point during the decade, LUCA occurs at the end of the decade. We really want to maintain our address list on an ongoing basis through the decade. And that was one of the changes we made within Geography Division last decade. Continuous updating of the address list through collection of address files from local governments. We want to keep that work going. Now, whether that's sharing our address list with the local governments is similar to LUCA is something that remains to be seen, but we at least are committed to collecting address updates on an ongoing basis and as frequently as we possibly can. And the more efficient that process is of flowing information and to, at multiple levels and standardizing the formats, the more effective we can be at just pulling data in and being confident that it's going to match our files or it's going to match our formats. And in short, the goal here is to reduce person time in review and maximize the flow of information from one place to another, so that we're all maintaining address lists that are as accurate and up to date as possible.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Kanishk. So obviously in your collaboration, this is the benefit to the Census Bureau. How will planning use its building permit data that it collects?
Oh, we have grand plans. I mean, now this goes into, but I can't speak much about it, but we do have a plan that we had proposed all the way to the governor's office. We are hoping to get data, not just as far as the building permits is concerned, but also from other state agencies and put it all together for the greater good. So I will just give a very small example as to the comprehensive way we are actually trying to use data is, well, a simple example would be right now there is an opioid issue pretty much across the country. So we look at different charts, different trends as far as the opioid use is concerned, and the impact. Unfortunately, people sometimes overconsume. There are first responders going out there. And unfortunately, there are a few deaths too. But then when you look at that data, that doesn't really tell us much by itself. It's just a trend. It just tells us things are going up or down. Similarly, we have data on crime, and that again tells you what what the pockets are where crime is spiking or whether it's going down. What we are talking about is trying to bring all of this data together. So when you think about silos, you've got the crime data, you've got the opioid data. Now, if you actually merge the two, you actually start seeing the correlation between opioids and crime. Now, when you actually bring in the socioeconomic data that the Census Bureau provides, you can actually start looking at deeper trends. Like you can start looking at, I guess, the education levels, the income levels, and then you start getting into root cause. So this particular data is actually going to play into well, hopefully it doesn't just remain a plan. Hopefully we get to act upon it. But that's going to be one of the ways that we are hoping to use all of this data. I wish I could share more, but since it's still in the works, I'll just limit myself to that one example.
Well, thank you. This will be the last question for this session. This question comes from Samantha Bulkfish from the Delaware Office of Planning Coordination. Samantha asks, the Delaware office is currently collecting permit applications and development applications. How can we learn more about feeding this data into the census? We are working on an MOU with the census for statewide BAS submissions.
I guess I would ask, who are you working with at Census on that? Well, and we don't have to answer that, but I can follow up on this. And it would be, if we're talking about permits and construction, it would be folks in the economic directorate, and I forget the exact names and the specific division, but it's the building permit survey and the survey of construction. But I can go back to my records and find contacts and get back in touch with, get that information back to you. I guess we can decide what would be the best way to follow up. I can.
All right, what we'll do is, Michael, we will provide you with Samantha's information, and then
Okay.
you both can contact each other. But
That
I want to
sounds
thank
great.
both of you for this panel session, for this panel discussion, and we appreciate all the information you've provided to us. Going on to our next poll question, John, if you can bring that up. Our next poll question is, how familiar are you with Census Bureau's Population and Housing Unit Estimates Program? We'll wait for responses.
We thank you for participating in this and for all the people that are voting in. Just wanted to remind you that if you are viewing this in full screen mode, please exit that so you can respond with your mouse clicker.
And the responses, as we can see, are very familiar at 27%, somewhat familiar at 55%, and not familiar at all at 18%. So with this poll question, for those of you who are somewhat familiar and not familiar at all, we have Ryan Burson with the Census Bureau who's going to present on the Census Bureau's Population Housing Unit Estimates Program.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to show my screen now. And I want to ask everyone, can you see my screen? And can you hear me well?
Everything is 5 by 5.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, I'm Ryan Burson. I'm a demographer in the population division at the Census Bureau, and I'm very happy to be with you. I came to the Census Bureau in 2008. Before that, I was state demographer of Missouri. Many of you, well, some of you may know that. I worked very closely as a coordinating agency, which was led by our Missouri State Library, but I was a coordinating agency and participated very closely with the State Data Center program. And I just want to tell you guys, I very much appreciate all the work you do, and I know what that is. So thank you. This morning, it is, yeah, still morning. I'd like to go over some things that I hope will be helpful to you. I will describe the subject, content, and geography of the data disseminated by the Population Estimates Program, which we sometimes will refer to as PEP. I'll go over our estimates release schedule with you and describe how to access the estimates on our website. I will also point you to some of the additional resources for learning more about the estimates. There's a lot to know, and I hope I hit the primary points this morning, but I just want you guys to know that we'll be on hand and we'll give you more contact information for following up on any questions that you have. Last, I'll be joined by other members of our estimates and projections area to try to answer any questions you may have. Yesenia Costa, my branch chief of the Coordination to Dissemination Outreach Branch, and also a very extremely knowledgeable person and an expert in the estimates, Katie Wingert, will be on hand to answer any questions that you have. The estimates disseminated by the Population Estimates Program are mandated by federal law, and they're used, as you may know, to allocate hundreds of billions of dollars in federal government spending each year. The estimates include basic population and housing topics supporting the American Community Survey and other federal surveys in the form of population controls and denominators for rates. Also used by academic and business researchers, and of course, in a lot of different ways in the public and private sectors for program planning. Our most current estimates are as of July 1, 2021, but we have historical estimates that extend back to 1900 for some areas. Data releases occur annually for over 80,000 areas in the United States and Puerto Rico. What do we mean by the term estimates? When we use the term estimates, we're referring to the official measures of population housing units between censuses. The estimates are based on the date of the previous decennial census. They're produced using primarily administrative records data on components of change, such as births and deaths and migration. The estimates typically are for prior dates, with some short-term projections for the nation. They typically include annual data as of July 1 for each year, but they also include monthly estimates at the national level. This table summarizes all of our estimates products by geography and type. The levels of available estimate geography are listed in the columns across the top, and the available demographic types of estimates are listed in the rows down the side. Reviewing the table, we see that total resident population estimates are disseminated for the United States, states, metropolitan, micropolitan areas, counties, cities and towns, and for Puerto Rico and its municipios. Components of change, that is births, deaths, and net migration, are disseminated for all areas except places and municipios. Age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin characteristics estimates are disseminated for all areas except metro and micro statistical areas and cities and towns. Note that characteristics estimates for Puerto Rico are given only by age and sex, and they do not include race and Hispanic origin detail. Monthly estimates for the 5 estimates universes, our term for a very interesting term, estimates universes are disseminated for the United States only. I've listed below in the note the 5 universes, which include resident population, the resident population plus armed forces overseas, civilian population, then the civilian non-institutionalized population, and last, the household population. Group quarters estimates are disseminated for the United States, states, and counties. And also for those areas, we disseminate housing unit estimates. PEP releases estimates on a rolling basis, beginning in December and ending in June of the following year. This table shows our vintage 22 estimates release schedule by type of product. As you can see, the first vintage 22 estimates will be released in December. In fact, the target date is December 22nd. They will include population totals, components of change, and voting age population for the US and states and the Puerto Rico Commonwealth. The March release will include population totals and components of change for counties. Only population totals will be released for municipios. The release in April is kind of a special one that we do. It's a data set with characteristics by single year of age and sex for the United States only. In May, we will release total population for cities and towns and total housing units for the nation, states, and counties. We will also release population estimates for metro and micro statistical areas. We've disseminated the metro micro estimates in March in the past, but due to delayed geographic updates for the new planning regions in Connecticut, we'll have to push these estimates to May. In June, we'll release population estimates by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin for the US, states, and counties, by age and sex for Puerto Rico. Note that the metro and micro area estimates are created by aggregating county level estimates. In instances where metro and micro area estimates are not available, then they're not disseminated, it's still possible for users to go ahead and aggregate the county level estimates that release for these areas. But that will have to be done on your own until we disseminate. We cater to a variety of data users with unique needs, so we have a variety of data access tools. The PEP webpage is the primary way to access all of our estimates products. In December of 2021, we were able to release our vintage 2021 total population estimates for the nation and states on data.census.gov. We continue to collaborate with the Census Bureau Center for Enterprise Dissemination to post additional estimates products here. So for now, all estimates are given in Excel tables, as well as comma separated value or CSV data sets on our website. Our estimates are also available on Quick Facts. It's a quick and easy way to access facts about people, business, and geography all together. It provides statistics for all states, counties, and for cities and towns with a population of 5,000 or more. It's great for making quick comparisons for these areas. It includes data provided by the American Community Survey, our area, as well as other Census Bureau programs. Last, PEP estimates are available on the Application Programming Interface, or API. It lets developers create custom apps to reach new users and makes key demographic, socioeconomic, and housing statistics more accessible for many. PEP estimates on the API extend back to 1990, and currently only selected vintage 2021 estimates are available here. Additional vintage 2021 estimates and subsequent vintages content will be released when we start a routine releases on data.census.gov. This is the main population and housing unit estimates web page. All of our estimates content, current and historical, and it's key here for you to know that there's considerable content of historical content. All of these things can be accessed here. I want to show you how to access post-census estimates tables. When we use the term post-census, we are referring to the estimates that are based on the last decennial census and administrative records that are indicative of population change, such as birth and death records from states and the National Center for Health Statistics, as well as other data sets, including records from the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates. Let's look at a table from the vintage 2021 estimates. We would click on either one of these links that are pointed out here to access tables. When you select population housing unit estimates tables, we come to this web page. This is the top part of the page. Estimates are listed alphabetically by geography type. Notice that there are tabs referring to the years for which estimates are available. The default is for the latest vintage 2021 estimates. When we start releasing vintage 2022, that year will appear on this page. Let's select county population estimates we released last March. The procedure to do this for other areas is the same for other geographies and subjects. The top part of the page, when we click on that, is displayed here. Estimates are given for total resident population for all counties in the United States and for individual states. Further down the page, estimates are given, not shown here, for the components. Let's select total population for Maryland. Clicking on that, it renders this Excel table. This is the top portion of the table. You can see that in vintage 2021, we begin with the April 1, 2020 estimates base, and the estimates extend to 2021. Hence the label vintage 2021 for these estimates. July 1 of 2020 is given as well. Now I want to show you how to access what we call our downloadable data sets. These are typically much more detailed than tables. To do so, select the data link on the main population and housing unit estimates page, pointed out here. When we do that, then we would select population housing unit estimates data sets. You can see tables are below. You can access either tables or data sets from this page. And that brings us here. Like tables, data sets are listed in alphabetical order by geography type. Let's look at the data sets available for city and town population totals. This is the top part of the page displayed here. Notice the methodology link. We can go back. Above, we include estimates method statements on all of our estimates web pages for each type of geography and subject area. I'm going to scroll down on this page. Downloadable data sets are listed below tables. For convenience, we include both tables and downloadable data sets on the web page for each level of estimates geography. We will select the Maryland data set in just a moment for cities and towns. But first, I want to call your attention to the file layout above. This is an important companion to each data set. It gives information about the data set, including variable names and descriptions, as well as the vintage and date of release, and a lot more. Be sure to access the file layout associated with the data set you're downloading. The top portion of file layout for sub-county, and that's the term that we use for city and town estimates, resident populations for cities and towns. The file layout is the top portion of it is displayed here. Clicking on the data set for Maryland, we download this and it reads readily into Excel. It's a comma separated value file and reads right into Excel. The top portion of the data set for Maryland is displayed here. Among other things, it gives geographic summary level codes, state, county, and place codes, and place names, as well as the estimates. Can you see why the file layout is an important guide to the contents of the data set? This may seem a little bit daunting. It's just a thumbnail sketch. It's by no means is exhaustive, but we do disseminate the method statements, which are very detailed. But I'd like to touch briefly now on our estimates methods. The methods we use to create the estimates vary by level of geography. For national, state, and county estimates, we use the cohort component method. The population estimate at any given time starts with the population-based, the last decennial census, or the previous point in the time series. Births are added, deaths are subtracted, and then net migration is added, both international and domestic. Birth and death records are supplied each year by the National Center for Health Statistics and by our partners in the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates, who work with their health departments. Net international migration is estimated using data from the American Community Survey, the Puerto Rico Community Survey, and the Defense Manpower Data Center. Net domestic migration is factored in by incorporating data from the Internal Revenue Service. Also, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Social Security Administration, the American Community Survey, and the Federal State Cooperative for Estimates. The result is the ending population, resident population estimate for that particular area. For sub-county population estimates, that is for cities and towns and townships in a number of states, the population estimates for cities and towns are created by distributing the county population estimates to each place within the county based on the place's ratio of household pop to total housing units. We add that to an estimate of the population in group quarters to get the total resident population. The equation is featured here. The estimates are controlled to the estimates per county so that there is consistency across geographies. and that the tallies sum up to the county, properly to the county level. Input data for housing unit estimates come from the Census Bureau's building permits survey, the survey of construction, the manufactured home survey, and from our colleagues in the FSCPE. How accurate are the estimates? Population and housing unit estimates are made at the end of the decade without knowledge of the results of the census. They're made with the post-census estimates methodology we used during the decade and extend to April 1 of the census year. We compare these estimates with the census results to assess the accuracy of the estimates using an array of metrics that help us to understand the differences and draw a conclusion about the quality of our estimates and evaluate our methodology. Here's a summary of some basic comparisons of estimates against the last two censuses, the 2010 and 2020 censuses. Averages of the absolute values of the differences between the estimates and census results are shown. Sometimes we call this the mean absolute percent error, or the MAPE. We take the census minus the estimate, divide by the estimate, and multiply by 100 to get a percent difference for each area. As you all know, in general, the larger the error, the closer our estimates tend to come to the census. Of course, when we interpret these data, we need to remember that errors can occur both in the beginning and ending censuses. Also in our estimates procedures, which include the data we collect from administrative sources and our estimates models themselves. Just want to review this table for you. Our most recent results in the bottom row there for the nation, of course, this doesn't involve an average, it is just for the nation as a whole, and the percent difference was 0.6%, which is a little higher than it was in 2010. The 2020 US population estimates as of April 1 was actually 2 million under the census. Looking at the average absolute percent differences for states, we see that the 2020 results were similar to 2010, a little bit higher on average at 1.2%. Counties, a little higher, the average difference was 2.9, which is a little lower than what we experienced in 2010. We're still working on getting a similar statistic for our city and town estimates. Now I would like to turn to our intercensal estimates as opposed to our post-censal estimates. Intercensal estimates may be described as the smooth time series we create based on post-censal estimates at the end of the decade, adjusting to the results from the censuses at the beginning and at the end of the decade. Note that there are intercensal estimates available on the PEP webpage for nations, states, and counties for a variety of demographic subjects going back to 1900. Once intercensal estimates are released, they become our preferred estimates for the decade, superseding all other post-censal vintage estimates. Suppose you want to access an intercensal estimates table for states for the years in the 2000s. You would select the data or tables options as we did before. I've selected the tables option here, and I've gone one step further by using the more option in the row where you select the estimate year, and then selecting 2008 in the drop-down box. To get intercensal estimates for the 2000s, you could select any year in that range. I could have said 2001 or 2010 and get the same series. Note that PEP staff are working on the intercensal estimates for the this recent past decade. They are expected to be available next year. You can see that I highlighted 2008 here, and if I click on that, that'll bring us to this page of all of the choices that we have for intercensal estimates for the decade of the 2000s. I will scroll down on the page and select state intercensal tables. Now here, you're offered a variety of tables for state population totals, also for various state characteristics, including age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. Let's select population estimates by sex and age for Maryland. The selection yields this Excel tables. The table has estimates for 5-year age groups and other selected age groups for both sexes, for males and for females, for all of the years between 2000 and 2010. I said the estimate series is smooth. If there's a lot of change, it's possible that the series may not appear that smooth, but what it does do when we adjust to the intercensal series from the post-censal estimates, it does bring the series into agreement with the beginning and ending censuses. Now, this slide and the next slide are, I'm giving these to you to provide a way for you to find out additional information and be able to contact the branches in our estimates and projections area to follow up if you need to. It includes, in fact, not only our population estimates, but also population projections. And it will help us and you to identify the subject matter expert in a particular program who can answer the question for you. My branch is listed first here, and that can be your first line of inquiry. We keep the full catalog and can tell you exactly what the status of what estimates and projection products are available up to date. We provide and point you to the product release schedule. We can also provide special tabulations that are not disseminated on the page and answer different questions about accessing data on the website. The population estimates branch, if you have questions about how total population and components of change, how those are estimated, questions about the methodology, this is the branch you want to go to. They can also answer questions about the characteristics estimates, age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, and they are the experts on the estimates of military and group quarters population. Naturally, the local government estimates and migration processing branch can answer questions about city and town population estimates and housing unit estimates. They also are the processors of the migration data from the IRS and can answer questions about methodology for domestic migration. They also oversee the Population Estimates Challenge Program and the Special Census Information Program. The Challenge Program, which allows for local jurisdictions to challenge the estimates that we have published. And the Special Census Information Program, that program provides for local jurisdictions to ask the Census Bureau to come out and conduct special enumerations. International Migration Branch, of course, can answer the questions about international migration. They also oversee the Puerto Rico estimates, can answer specific questions about Puerto Rico. Last, the PEEP, we call it PEEP, Population Evaluation Analysis and Projections Branch, can answer questions about the projections, demographic analysis, our evaluation estimates, and then questions about our modified race research. That brings me to the end of the presentation, and I really thank you for your time. Yesenia and Katie and I will be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Ryan. We invite all of you to turn on your webcams. So we have a couple of questions. Let me ask the first question. So as planning departments and as local state data centers, when we look at the census estimates and look at the methodology, we noticed that the census in the 2020 and 2021 estimates use what's called a blended base. So the question is, will the census estimates program stop using the blended base after the release of the 2020 Census Demographic and Housing Characteristics file is released?
I think Katie is really quite a subject matter expert and knows the ins and outs and can answer this.
Please.
I'm not definitely the section special. Oh my goodness, I can't even say it. I'm not the subject matter expert on this particularly, but I can talk a little bit about it. Based on a number of issues with surrounding the Census 2020 data and the timing and our Bureau efforts to incorporate differential privacy and a number of issues, we are looking into how best to utilize the census data when it becomes available internally and externally. We have a team working to analyze the data and to figure out how best to do that. And that's called the, I believe it's Base Evaluation and Research Team, BERT, we call it. We expect to be utilizing the blended base for a few more vintages probably, but our research that's ongoing will inform what census data we're able to use in our estimates and when. So we have a couple of issues. One that we have every decade is that the census data are collected with some other race as a category, but in estimates we can't use some other race because administrative records don't include that category. So we make what Ryan referred to as modified race. And so we have to do that process yet. Once the census data are available internally and to the public in the DHC, I think it's called, we will be able to work more on that modified race process, and that will feed in. So we expect the blended base will be with us for, I would guess, a couple more vintages, and will progress over time toward utilizing more and more census data. It's definitely something we're very focused on within ENP and within the POP division as a whole, pulling on the knowledge of the race and Hispanic origin experts and the other experts, demographic experts within POP division. So it's ongoing. There's lots of information that will continue to be shared. This is a high priority topic for us. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that response.
Also, I wasn't expecting to be on camera, so I apologize for my background and my, non-professional t-shirt.
That's the greatness of telework. I do have a question from Kirk Eby. He asks, why did Maryland's population in the PEP decrease from April to July 2020? So in other words, when you're looking at, I think Ryan showed a slide that showed the intercensual data. And so when you look at it for 2020, you look at the April 2020 number and the July 2020 number, and there's a decrease. And Kirk is asking what may account for that.
So this would be in the data that we released from vintage 2021. Is that right?
I think she's talking about the intercensal estimates in the 2000s, and I believe. Is that right?
No, we're looking at, I think the questioner is asking about the April 2020 and July 2020 numbers, estimates. So you're looking at the April 2020 base and the July 2020 estimate. Why is there such a big difference?
We can pull that up on our website and look for the component of change. I don't have that offhand, but I can certainly do that. Perhaps we can go on to the next question while I look into that. Or I could look into it and email back to the group. Is that...
Sure, absolutely. So let's go to our next question from Valerie Monroe, and she asks, I have a general question concerning the slide on the accuracy of the estimates. In cases where there are large disparities between the population estimates and the census counts, is any further analysis done to ascertain the reason for the disparity? And secondly, is reconciliation done? And I believe we lost your voice.
Oh, now am I here?
Yes, you're here.
Sorry. We definitely follow up on the details of we do the summary measures like Ryan shared, the MAPES, and what we call MALPI is algebraic, right? Algebraic and absolute differences. So we're looking at big measures to see overall how our estimates are faring compared to the census, but we also do look at the details. And we each decade, when we get the new census data, we're looking at, is there a particular component of change that we think really was part of the issue that we need to, beef up our work on. So if you go back 2 decades to 2000, overall, the census was much higher than our estimates. And what we discovered upon research was that we really needed to improve our method for estimating international migration, that a lot had happened in the 90s that we hadn't picked up on. And so we did a lot of work to improve that. And we do that every decade to look at what components we're talking about, what parts of our method can use improvements, that we can focus on and look at. So we absolutely will be doing that on a broad scale of, overall what components are, need upgrading, what we can look for new data or new methods. But we do look specifically at places, individual places, and try to assess where those gaps came from, how we can address that. Is that?
Yeah. Okay. Last question before any other questions will be submitted to you for your review and response back to the attendee. But the last question we have today for you is from Quizao, and she asks, some local counties in Maryland furnish their own semi-annual or annual population estimates using occupancy permits. Local estimates are higher than the intercensal estimates. Would the Census Bureau consider reconciling the locals' estimates? So in other words, as you understand, California is one example, develops, and Montgomery County here in Maryland develop their own estimates. And would you be reconciling, their numbers with your numbers? Or would you take their numbers into consideration?
We at this stage don't reconcile. We aren't able to incorporate actual estimates into our housing or population into our estimates, except through the components of change. So our housing unit and sub-county process right now relies on the FSCPE members to submit data. And, so what we do is make a set of housing unit estimates for each sub-county area with building permits, mobile home placements, housing loss, and these estimates, and we submit them to the FSCPE member. They're able to look at them, and if they have improvements or more data, they can submit that back to us and say, oh, actually, your permits should be like this. Or, we know that the permits assigned in the county of Montgomery really should be distributed to Rockville and Gaithersburg in a different way, for example. They also can say, actually, we think certificates of occupancy are a better measure for our state than building permits. And they can submit that data, and we will use certificates of occupancy instead of permits. They can submit, so they can override our data with updates. They can override with additional data. They can also give conversions, so residential to non-conversions, and housing loss. What am I thinking? I think those are the components. So we have that capability. We need that really to come through the FSCPE though. We need to limit ourselves just for logistical purposes to the 51 state FSCPE members. But that FSCPE member can gather that information from their area, from the local governments or the other partners within their state, and submit that to us kind of as their clearinghouse. So we can't, and then of course that housing unit population or estimates feeds into our sub-county. So we're able to incorporate it in that way, but not directly as, here's your housing count, we're going to plug that in instead of our housing count.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your response.
Sure.
We do have some additional questions, but as I said,
actually, let me just interject and say that what we see in Maryland between 2020 and 2021 is that domestic migration, we believe it's domestic migration declined, and that was the source of that change. That was something we saw in a lot of the nation. Domestic migration really had a big impact in that 3-month period that we don't know for sure, but we do attribute anecdotally a lot of that to COVID and just things that were changing at that time. So for that earlier question.
Well, thank
it was
you so
basically
much.
a 12,000 person decline in total pop out of 6 million for Maryland. But as Katie points out, it was something that we did witness elsewhere.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And any additional questions that we have, we will submit to you via email, and you can respond to the requester directly. Thank you so much for this presentation. And for the audience, we will make all presentations available on our website after this event. Thank you. And now for our next and last poll question, John, if you could bring that up. So the question is, do you live in an urban or rural area? So please select one, either urban or rural. And we'll wait for the responses. And thank you. And our responses are 84% of you live in an urban area and 16% of you live in a rural area. And this leads to our next presenter, Michael Ratcliffe, on his presentation on urban and rural classification. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. I'm working on showing my screen. Can folks see it?
We can see your screen.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, great, thank you. It's a real pleasure to have a chance to talk about urban and rural, both just a general overview of the Census Bureau's urban and rural classification, and then I'll talk about changes to the criteria for 2020. And recognizing where we are in the timing for the meeting, I'll try to run through things relatively quickly so we have plenty of time for questions. I do want to start though with a bit of history. Won't dwell too much on the past, but do want to say that the Census Bureau has been identifying urban and rural territory, urban places, rural territory, and then urban areas for over 100 years now. It goes back to the late 19th century. And over that century of defining urban and rural, we've made a number of changes to our concept and criteria based on changes in settlement patterns around cities, changes in the way that we perceive and think of what's urban and what's rural, changes to technology and data and the resolution of data. So the ability to manage large amounts of data in geographic information systems with digital databases, increasing spatial resolution of our data. All of these have come into play over the past 100 years in affecting how we define what is urban and what is rural in this country. So I'm going to start with a little, so with that as background, I'm going to talk a little bit about 1950. 1950 was when we first began defining urbanized areas of 50,000 or more people. These were, the process started with cities of 50,000 or more and identified the densely settled suburbs around each of those cities. What's important in looking back to the 1950 delineation in relation to where we are today with the 2020 criteria is in 1950, we did not require contiguity of urban areas. So here we're looking at the Baltimore urbanized area definition from 1950, and you can see that there were a couple of non-contiguous outlying areas of high population density, or actually high housing density. That's the other aspect of the 1950 criteria that differed from the following decades. In 1950, we used housing unit density to identify the densely settled territory around cities of 50,000 or more people. And if those densely settled areas were offset from the main body of the urban area by intervening low density territory, we in effect jumped out across that low density territory, included the non-contiguous densely settled area in the urbanized area, but did not include the intervening corridor. That's important because as we'll see, as I get into the talk, we're to some extent going back to where we were in 1950 with some of our criteria. In 1960, we changed the criteria. We shifted to population density measured at small geographic areas, primarily using enumeration districts. And we required contiguity for each urban area. And that requirement for contiguity carried through the 2010 round of delineation, and the use of population density carried through over that period of time as well. There were other changes which I'll skip over. They'll be in the slides that will be posted. We can come back to during Q&A if you have other questions about the history of our change. Changing criteria, and it's also those changes are detailed in the paper that the earlier slide paper on the history of our urban and rural classification from 1910 through 2010, and that's on our urban and rural website. So I want to come back. I want to bring us up to contemporary time and level set or remind ourselves what of the 2010 definition of urban areas and the urban rural classification. In 2010, we, as with previous decades prior to urban areas, urbanized areas of 50,000 or more people, and urban clusters of at least 2,500 people and less than 50,000 people. Both of these areas were defined based primarily on population density, measured at the census tract or the census block levels. We started the delineation process looking at census tracts that had at least 1,000 people per square mile. included those within the initial urban core. Then once we had exhausted that set, then dropped down to the block level, identified those that had 1,000 people per square mile, added those to the urban core, and then to round out to continue out to the edge of the urban area, we utilized a lower population density threshold, getting out into the suburbs using a density of at least 500 people per square mile. Urbanized areas, urban clusters were defined using the same criteria. The only thing that distinguished them was whether they had 50,000 or more people or less than 50,000 people. In 2010, about 81% of the population in the US was urban, 19% rural. And when we look at 2020 ACS 5-year data, the 2016 through 2020 5-year data, those same percentages apply, about 81% urban, 19% rural. Looking at Maryland, we see in 2010, the state was about 87.2% urban, and well, not about, it was 87.2% urban, 12.8% rural. And when we look at the ACS 5-year data, we see the proportion of population that's urban has risen slightly to 89.7. Those data in the ACS 5, the 2016 to 2020 ACS 5-year data estimates are using the 2010 boundaries for urban areas. And we'll talk more about this as we get into the criteria. So let me jump into the changes for 2020. And I'll talk in more detail, but in short, urban areas for 2020, the Census Bureau will identify urban areas of at least 2,000 housing units or at least 5,000 people. So an area can qualify on either one of those thresholds, either at least 2,000 housing units or at least 5,000 people. And you'll note that that 5,000 person threshold is an increase from the past of 2,500 people. And we'll talk more about this. And we're defining areas primarily based on housing unit density measured at the census block level. So again, we're shifting away from population density and moving to measurement of housing unit density. And we'll talk more about this as well. We'll have several different density thresholds that we're applying. The initial urban core density of at least 425 housing units per square mile, the remainder of the urban area, filling that out across the suburbs, density of at least 200 units per square mile. That's similar to the approach that we took in previous decades with the initial urban core at 1,000 people per square mile, and then the remainder at 500 per square mile. And then at the final stage of qualification, we want to make sure that each of these areas of densely developed housing, we want to make sure that each of these areas has what would be recognizable as a high density nucleus that you would find typical within an urban area. We'll look to make sure that there's at least one nucleus with at least 1,275 units per square mile. Again, we'll get into more of this as I go through the presentation. Key changes. So there's 6 key changes to the urban area criteria for 2020. I've already talked about 2 of these. The other key conceptual change is that we will no longer distinguish between urbanized areas of 50,000 or more people and urban clusters of less than 50,000. I'm going to talk about each of these, so I won't go into detail at this point. Then there's 3 key changes that are more of the technical delineation, kind of the mechanics of how we delineate areas. We're reducing the jump distance from 2.5 miles to 1.5 miles. So we're going back to that distance that was in place, that maximum that was in place from 1950 through 1990. We're not going to include the intervening low density corridors. And then we've also instituted changes in how we're going to decide whether to split large agglomerations, and if so, where. And we're going to use commuting data to make that decision. Again, I'll talk about each of these changes in a little more detail. So change, and I think there's quite a few slides related to the change in thresholds. I think won't go into all the details on each of these just for the sake of time. But again, we can come back to these if you have questions, and they'll be available for you after the meeting's over. But again, we've increased our threshold, our minimum threshold for defining an urban area. The 2,500 person threshold had been in use since 1910. And the Census Bureau's threshold was the lowest in use across various federal agencies. There is no federal standard definition for urban and rural. So each statistical agency, each programmatic agency, any federal agency is able to adopt its own definition of urban and rural and set minimum thresholds for urban at different population or housing or other levels, generally population levels. Over the years, we've had rural stakeholders and analysts have asked us have questioned the continued validity of a 2,500 person threshold that was adopted 100 years ago. And we've routinely received questions about whether we would consider an increase. Most recently, prior as we were heading into the 2020 census, in the late last decade, the Western Governors Association asked us if we'd consider raising the minimum threshold up to 10,000 people. That would bring the Census Bureau's definition into line with the minimum thresholds that are often used by Department of Agriculture. We decided, so we initially proposed raising our minimum to 10,000 people. What we heard from the responses to our proposed criteria was that that was too large of a leap from 2,500 up to 10,000. And by and large, those that responded felt that we needed to, suggested a compromise of 5,000 people or something less than 10,000, but still agreed that 2,500 was too low. So what we've done, as I've mentioned already, we decided to adopt a minimum threshold of at least 5,000 people. And as we'll talk about some more, we've also been moving towards using housing units. So it's an either or situation, 5,000 people or 2,000 housing units. And 2,000 housing units was identified based on the national average of 2.5 people per housing unit. So the impact of this change nationwide is that about 1,000 small urban clusters would shift, about 1,000 areas that were defined as urban in the past would shift to rural status, and those areas contain about 3.5 million people. Looking at 2016 to 2020 ACS data, there'd be about 9 areas in Maryland that would shift from urban to rural status. And those contained about 35,000 people. So again, just to reiterate that the Census Bureau's the Census Bureau's threshold of 2,500 has been the lowest in use by federal agencies. This diagram from a really great paper from 2008 by John Cromarty and Sean Buckholtz about defining rural really helps illustrate this fact that sometimes between 2,500 and 50,000, sometimes communities are identified as urban based on a federal program or a federal agency's definition. Sometimes they're defined as rural. So it's entirely possible with all of the different programs that are being administered by federal agencies, the different definitions and classifications that are in place, a community could be urban for one program, rural for another. Coming up to 5,000 people brings the Census Bureau's threshold in line with the Department of Transportation's minimum of 5,000 people. Why 2,500? I won't go into all of this detail, I won't read this whole slide, but looking back into the past, and looking at a great paper that was written by the Bureau's chief demographer in 1949, there really never was a clear explanation as to why we selected 2,500 in 1910. There was no real science behind that threshold, just a feeling that that was the right threshold for that time. So again, the impact, what's the impact of this increase? If we look only at the the population estimates from the 2016 to 2020 ACS, and we don't take into account any other sorts of changes that have occurred in settlement patterns, population distribution, other aspects of change to the criteria, what we see is about a 1 percentage point change in urban and rural populations. Urban population would drop by about 1 percentage point, and the rural population would increase as a share of the total by about 1 percentage point. In Maryland, we see not quite as much of a shift, but we do see a slight decline, a slight shift, a slight decline in the percentage share of urban population, going from 89.7 in 2020 using the ACS 5-year data applied to the 2010 thresholds. When we apply the current thresholds, the 2020 thresholds, Maryland's population would be about 89.2% urban. So not much of a change, but there is some change. I'm going to see if I can minimize trying to minimize some of the webinar information that's over on the right of my screen. That's affecting. I can't see the far right, so I'll try to.
No, Michael, we're good. We don't see.
Okay, you're good. You're good. It's only me that's being affected.
That's
okay,
correct.
Excellent.
It's invisible
right.
to the system, and you can minimize it by clicking the red box with the arrow in it.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. There we go. That's great. Now I can see what's on the right-hand side of my screen. One of the things is, so again, looking at 2020 at the 2020 ACS data and looking at population change in different sizes of urban areas, what we see in the smallest urban areas, those of less than 10,000 people, is overall population loss as compared to overall population gain for the larger urban areas. And what we saw in the 2020 census is that rural areas, the predominantly rural counties of the country, tended to be losing population, the predominantly urban counties gaining. And so what I'm showing here in looking at the population trends in different sizes of urban areas, the smallest urban areas are behaving, if you will, they're behaving more like rural. Their demographic shifts are more akin to or more similar to what we're seeing in other parts of rural America. All right, let me move into some of the other criteria changes. So one of the key changes, and I've mentioned this, but one of the key changes is shifting to housing unit density. And there are three reasons for this. One, when we're defining urban areas, we're defining the developed landscape, the densely developed landscape. Population density has been the surrogate for other measures of urbanization because that's what we had in the past, population density. But what we're really after is to try to define the developed landscape. And so part of our reasoning, part of the reason for shifting is that housing is a more direct measure of the developed landscape than population is. Population, housing units remain in place. Populations within those, the number of people in each of those units can vary over time, but the housing stock itself remains relatively stable, regardless of population shifts within those units. So it's a more direct measure of the developed landscape. If we had data on all buildings, if we had nationwide accurate data sets for all buildings, we'd move in that direction. But housing gives us a more direct measure of the developed landscape. It also gives us the ability to update urban areas between censuses. So the constraint, since we've been defining urban areas at the smallest unit of geography possible. That's been the census block. We've used census block level data since 1990. We only have population data by block from the decennial census. So that has constrained us to updating urban areas only once every decade after each decennial census. Yet we know urbanization proceeds across the landscape from year to year. We are maintaining our master address file, an inventory of addresses and housing units. We're maintaining that on an annual basis. So by shifting to housing unit density, it gives us the ability to update the extent of urban areas between censuses. And this is especially important in parts of the country where urban areas are growing very quickly from one year to the next. Going back to the data I was showing earlier for the ACS, all of that information was for the areas defined based on data in 2010. And in the case of Maryland, we don't see, we saw a slight increase in urban population. So what that's telling us is populations increasing within the boundaries of the urban areas. But when you get into other states like Texas, other states that are growing where the suburbs are growing very quickly, we actually see a slight decline in the percentage of population that's urban. We'll see an example of this in an upcoming slide. So shifting to housing density gives us the ability to update on a more frequent basis between censuses. We haven't decided yet whether we will or how frequently, but we're now poised to be able to update between decennial censuses if we have the resources. And then lastly, census block level housing unit counts are invariant. So if you follow the differential privacy discussions for the 2020 census, you know that below the state level, the population counts were variable. Jason talked earlier about the noise that was injected into the data. Housing counts are invariant. So the total number of housing units reported in a block is exactly as it was enumerated. And so that gives us a more greater certainty and no noise. So there's no noise in the block level housing unit counts. I talked about updating between censuses, and here we're looking at just a small area to the west of San Antonio, Texas. You can see the urbanized area boundary is in blue, and you can see the suburbanization that's occurred outside the urban area. The suburbanization that's occurred post 2010, but until the redefined boundaries are released, or up through the last decade, all of that housing that we're looking at here that's outside the 2010 boundary was classified as rural in our data. So the ability to update between censuses is critical for producing more accurate data about urbanization. And then the third conceptual change is that we will no longer distinguish between areas of 50,000 or more people and areas of less than 50,000. We really don't see in the literature about urban areas, about urban places, central place theory and so forth, we really don't see any scientific basis for 50,000 as a threshold. I think it was adopted in the past more out of operational concerns and the availability of data, but there's really isn't anything to indicate that 50,000 is a significant divider between types of areas. And here, what we're looking at in this slide is economic data for the 5 urban areas between 49,000 people and 51,000 people, number of firms, retail sales, per capita retail sales. This is all data from the economic census and the survey of business owners. And as you can see, there really is no difference, or there's very little difference between areas just below 50,000 and areas just above. So Danville, Virginia at 49,344 people has more retail sales than New Bern, North Carolina at 50,503. Yet under our old criteria, these were identified as different types of urban areas, and then a whole series of policy decisions made by other agencies and analysts flow from that distinction, placing New Bern in a different category than Danville. And we can see in terms of per capita sales, Roswell, New Mexico really isn't that much different from New Bern, and actually had more per capita sales than Pascagoula. So again, looking at the economic data, we really don't see 50,000 standing out as a significant demarcation between types of urban areas and the economic influence that they have on the surrounding regions. So by by simply calling everything an urban area and by ceasing to use the term urbanized area and urban cluster, we're hoping to take some of that emphasis off that 50,000 as a threshold, and put the emphasis more on looking at the actual activities that are occurring in urban areas, rather than again saying that things of more than a certain population are fundamentally different than things just below that threshold. All right, going to the more mechanical aspects. I've already mentioned the change in the jump distance and the decision to allow areas to be non-contiguous. When we adopted the 2.5 mile distance in 2000, we thought that it was a good idea recognizing development patterns, but immediately after releasing the areas, we heard from stakeholders and analysts that concerns about overbounding of urban areas, that the urban areas we'd pushed urban area boundaries too far out into the rural countryside. We were seeing some signs of that ourselves, so we had a concern that we had a general concern about overbounding. We proposed a reduction in the jump distance in the 2010 round of delineation. Comments were mixed. We had an equal number of people in favor of reducing the distance as we had people in favor of keeping the distance. And again, after the 2010 definitions came out, we saw similar concerns, or received similar concerns about overbounding. The one change that really helped push us, the change in 2010 in the criteria that really, as we looked at the impact of the 2.5 mile, one of the changes that really helped push us to decide to reduce this distance was the use of impervious surface data from the National Land Cover Database. The jump had always been, hops and jumps had always been the purpose of these had been to account for non-residential urban land uses that were offsetting residential areas, densely populated residential areas. As we brought the impervious surface layer in from the National Land Cover Database and incorporated that into our delineation, that data identified pavement, areas with large amounts of pavement, and we used the impervious surface layers as a proxy for non-residential urban land uses. But we didn't change the jump at all, the jump distance. So the impact of bringing in data about impervious surfaces to account for office parks, industrial parks, shopping centers, and so forth, without this change in the jump distance, that just exacerbated the overbounding that was occurring. Areas that had been jumps in the past were now picked up. Blocks that had been included as jump corridors in the past were now picked up as under the impervious surface criteria, and then we allowed more jumps. And so as we looked at the 2010 results, the jumps that we were seeing were now, the corridors, at least that low density corridor, were now occupied primarily by non-urban land uses. And I'll show an example here from California. The black line, the heavy dark line, the heavy black line is the 2010 census boundary for Visalia, California. And what we see in the different colors in yellow would be the potentially the area based on the 2020 criteria, and then Exeter, California would be a separate urban area based on 2020 criteria. In the intervening territory, we'll zoom in here. What we can see in this intervening territory is largely a farming and agricultural landscape. So again, looking at the nature of what we were jumping across in the past, or even in these hops, and the fact that many of these areas were non-urban uses, that factored into reducing the jump distance and the decision to allow non-contiguity of urban areas, going back to where we were in 1950. So this area that we're looking at here would be classified as rural, and the area in the developed areas on either side would be classified as urban. And then lastly, turning to the urban agglomerations, our automated delineation process results in large agglomerations. So Washington, Baltimore, for example, there is no break in the densely developed area between Washington and Baltimore cities. And so where do you, but we know that these are separate, these are operating as separate urban areas. They have their own economic patterns, they have their own social and economic relationships. So where do you draw the boundary to separate this large agglomeration into more meaningful urban areas? And how do you make that decision? In the past, that decision was based on the criteria varied. In the past, we used the definitions of metropolitan and micropolitan statistical, or metropolitan statistical areas or primary metropolitan statistical areas. So in 1990, well, and in this case, in 1990, the boundary between the two urban areas was drawn along the boundary of North Laurel and Savage census designated places. Somewhat recognizing the fact that southeastern Howard County had a stronger, at that time, had a stronger commuting relationship with the Washington area than with the Baltimore area. But it was based more on impressions and less on data. In 2000, the decision was made to split the agglomeration based on the location of the narrowest corridor in development. And so that pushed the split to the south into an area between Laurel and Beltsville. And you can see the narrowing corridor there. With the result being that the entire Laurel area, northern Prince George's County and the immediate area on the Howard County side and the Anne Arundel side, shifted to the Baltimore urbanized area. 2010, same basic, 2010, slightly different approach. We just decided that we would split between the existing urban areas as close to the 2000 boundary as possible. And so this kept northern Prince George's County, the Laurel area, in the Baltimore urbanized area. For 2020, we're going to use census block level commuting data from the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics program, their origin destination data set, the loads data. And so this is operating at the same level of geography, block level commuting data. So the same spatial resolution as the housing unit density data that we're applying. And the result is likely to be that the split between the Baltimore and Washington urban areas will be along the Prince George's Howard County boundaries, or Prince George's Anne Arundel Howard boundary, with areas to the north being included in the Baltimore urban area, areas to the south in the Washington urban area. And I'll finish up very quickly here. More information on our urban and rural page, the links to frequently asked questions, the Federal Register notice, the schedule, the release schedule. Will announce areas in December of this year, and you can see the release schedule for the variety of products. We just released a video, the link is here on this page, a video summarizing our urban area classification. And this will be the site to go to for additional information as we release the areas in December and then flow data out. And with that, I will stop and thank you and take questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that presentation. It was very informative. I do have a question from Chuck Boyd, who asks, given the redefinition of urban areas, will you be going back to reassess 2010 and possibly earlier to other decennial data sets to enable a better comparison of apples to apples?
I doubt it. It's something that we always would like to be able to do, but we're constrained a bit by available resources and the ongoing updates to other geographies. But to the extent that we can, or at least provide information about how to interpret the results and carry them backwards, we'll try to do so. But at this point, I'd say we just don't have the resources to take the current the 2020 criteria and apply them back to the past in the same fashion. The best we can do is similar to what I've been presenting here, is at least saying, you know, based on the thresholds, these areas would cease to be urban or would shift to rural.
Thank you for that response. Just one quick question. It's rather a simpler question. When will data for urban areas be released?
December, it'll be December of this year. I don't have a specific day, but it will be probably more towards the middle or latter half of the month. But we'll really, at that time, we will release the list of urban areas. Then, as the product schedule showed, it will have tiger line boundaries, tiger line files, and so forth. Then those boundaries will be picked up and used by other surveys. So we would expect to see American Community Survey data for these new areas in their release in 23. So in the 5-year data that are released in probably 24. It'll depend on how quickly they get the new boundaries into production. So perhaps as you'll see ACS data as early as December of 23. And then, but again, it'll have to depend on how, with our release in December of 22, if they get the new urban areas into their production schedule in the American Community Survey, then it'll be 23 or perhaps if 24.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for the audience for staying after our 12:30 deadline. And again, to repeat, we will make available to everyone these presentations on our website. And now to Al Sundara.
Thank you, Krishna. I would like to offer a big thank you to the folks from the Census Bureau, Jason Devine, Michael Burrows, Ryan Burleson, and Mike Ratcliffe for their excellent presentations. And also Kanishk Sharma from the Department of Planning, Krishna Kundi for coordinating the logistics of this meeting and moderating the questions. And also John Coleman, our communications and tech guru, for helping with the whole setup of the webinar. Finally, thank you for all of the people who attended and being patient through our technical difficulties. As Krishna mentioned, we will have this meeting recording posted on the website in the next week or so. And this concludes our annual meeting and workshop. Thank you and have a great day.